Hey everyone, welcome to Between the Episodes. I hope you are all doing well. Today, I want to argue that Walter White did not break bad because of a cancer diagnosis. His transformation into Heisenberg was the result of decades of repressed resentment, wounded pride, and a fragile ego that had been quietly festering inside him since the day he walked away from gray matter technologies for $5,000. The cancer did not create a monster. It gave an already broken man permission to stop pretending he was not one. Through the psychology of narcissism, manipulation, fractured masculinity, moral erosion, and identity dissociation, Walter White reveals that the most dangerous person in any room is not the one with nothing to lose, but the one who has spent a lifetime believing the world owes him everything. But before we begin, I would just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It is completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we have managed to build. Anyway, that is enough. Let us begin. Section 1. The Man Before the Monster. Walter White's Psychological Baseline. To understand how Walter White became one of the most dangerous men in New Mexico, you first have to understand who he was before any of it started. Because the truth about Walter White is that his story does not begin with cancer. It does not begin with a meth lab, or a drug empire, or a man in a black hat calling himself Heisenberg. His story begins with a quiet, ordinary life that was slowly eating him alive from the inside out. And if you pay close attention to the very first episode of Breaking Bad, you can already see the cracks. You can already see a man who is not happy, a man who feels like the world forgot about him, a man who believes, deep down in a place he would never say out loud, that he deserves more than what life gave him. When we first meet Walter White in the pilot episode of Breaking Bad, he is 50 years old. He lives in a modest home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with his wife Skylar and his teenage son Walter Jr., who has cerebral palsy. On the surface, everything looks fine. He has a family, he has a job, he has a roof over his head. But the moment you look a little closer, you start to see that nothing about this man's life is actually fine. Walter White is a high school chemistry teacher, and he is wildly overqualified for the job. This is a man who studied at the California Institute of Technology, one of the most respected science schools in the entire world. He helped contribute to research that won a Nobel Prize. He co-founded a scientific research company. And now, he is standing in front of a classroom full of teenagers who could not care less about what he has to say. His students ignore him. They text during his lessons. They show him no respect whatsoever. And Walter just takes it. He stands there, gives his lecture, and moves on. He has been doing this for years. The fire that once burned inside of him has been reduced to a flicker so faint that most people around him probably forgot it was ever there. But teaching is not even the worst part. Walter White works a second job. After school, he goes to the A1A car wash, where he works under a man named Bogdan Wolanets. Bogdan is the owner, and he treats Walter like he is nothing. Walter was originally hired to work the register, but Bogdan forces him to go outside and hand-wash cars. Think about that for a second. A man with a degree from Caltech, a man whose research helped win a Nobel Prize, is on his hands and knees scrubbing the dirt off of other people's cars. And to make it even worse, some of those cars belong to his own students. In the pilot episode, we see this exact situation play out. One of Walter's students pulls into the car wash, sees his chemistry teacher washing cars, and laughs at him. The student even takes a photo. Walter just keeps scrubbing. He does not say a word. He does not fight back. He just swallows the shame and keeps working. That scene tells you everything you need to know about where Walter White is mentally at the start of this show. He is a man who has accepted being humiliated as a normal part of his daily life. And that kind of acceptance does not come from nowhere. That kind of acceptance comes from years of being beaten down. Now at home, things are not much better. Walter and Skylar's marriage is functional, but far from warm. In the pilot episode, on the morning of Walter's 50th birthday, Skylar gives him a half-hearted birthday greeting and goes back to what she is doing, which is selling things on eBay from her laptop in bed. There is no excitement, no spark, no deep connection between them. Later that same night, Skylar gives Walter what can only be described as the most passionless, disinterested moment of physical affection in television history. She is not even looking at him. She is watching an auction on her laptop while it happens. And Walter just accepts it. He does not complain. He does not express frustration. He has been living in this emotional desert for so long that he probably does not even register how empty it all feels anymore. That is what years of feeling invisible does to a person. You stop expecting warmth because you have forgotten what it feels like. Then there is Hank Schrader, Walter's brother-in-law. Hank is a DEA agent, and he is everything Walter is not. Hank is loud, confident, funny, and commands every room he walks into. He is the kind of man people naturally look up to. And nowhere is this more obvious than at Walter's own birthday party in the pilot. The party is supposed to be about Walter. It is his 50th birthday. But the moment Hank shows up, the attention shifts. Hank pulls out his DEA-issued handgun and starts showing it off to a group of men in the living room, including Walter Jr. Everyone is fascinated. They pass the gun around. They ask questions. They are impressed. Walter Jr. is looking at Hank with the kind of admiration that any father would want directed at himself. And Walter just stands there, in his own home, at his own party, completely overshadowed. When Walter holds the gun and comments on how heavy it is, Hank laughs and says, "That's why they hire men." It is a joke. Hank probably does not even mean it as an insult. But for a man like Walter, who already feels small and unimportant in every area of his life, that one line cuts deep. Hank then gives a toast for Walter's birthday, but even the toast is half-hearted. Hank barely finishes it before grabbing Walter's beer and turning his attention to a breaking news story about a drug bust on the television. Walter is an afterthought at his own celebration. And this is the thing about Walter White that people miss when they talk about his transformation later in the series. They talk about the cancer like it was a switch that flipped. Like one day he was a good man, and the next day he was a criminal. But that is not how human beings work. Walter White was already suffering long before any doctor told him he was dying. He was suffering from something that does not show up on any medical scan. He was suffering from the feeling that his life had passed him by, that he had wasted his potential, that he was smarter than everyone around him, and yet somehow ended up with less than all of them. That feeling had been sitting inside of him for years, maybe decades, building up like pressure in a sealed container. And when you look at the way he carries himself in the pilot episode, you can see it. You can see it in the way his shoulders sag when he walks through the school hallway. You can see it in the way his voice goes flat when he teaches his chemistry class. You can see it in the way he stands in the background at his own party while Hank holds court. There is a scene in the pilot that often gets overlooked, but says more about Walter's mind than almost anything else in the first season. While teaching his class, Walter gives a short speech about chemistry. He tells his students that chemistry is technically the study of matter, but that he prefers to see it as the study of change. He talks about how electrons change their energy levels, how molecules change their bonds, how elements combine and become compounds. He describes it as growth, then decay, then transformation. He calls it fascinating. And the camera lingers on his face as he says all of this. And you can see something in his eyes. You can see that he is not just talking about chemistry. He is talking about himself. He is talking about the change he wishes he could make. He is talking about the transformation he does not yet know is coming. That speech was put in the very first episode on purpose by creator Vince Gilligan. It is a roadmap for the entire series. delivered by a man who does not yet realize he is describing his own future. Walter's personality at this point in the series is a very specific type. He is quiet, agreeable, and avoids conflict at all costs. He does not raise his voice. He does not push back against Bogdan. He does not challenge Hank. He does not argue with Skylar. He just goes along with whatever is happening around him. Like a man being carried by a current he stopped fighting against a long time ago. But underneath that calm surface, there is something else. There is anger. There is resentment. There is a deep, burning frustration that Walter has spent his whole adult life pushing down. You can see flashes of it in subtle moments. The way his jaw tightens when Hank makes a joke at his expense. The way his eyes narrow when his students disrespect him. The way he stares just a little too long at things that remind him of what he could have been. Walter White is not a man at peace with his life. He is a man at war with himself, and he has been losing that war for a very long time. What makes Walter even more interesting from a psychological standpoint is that he knows he is brilliant. This is not a man who lacks confidence in his own mind. Walter White is fully aware that he is one of the smartest people in any room he walks into. And that awareness is exactly what makes his life so painful for him. If Walter were average, if he had average intelligence and average ambitions, then his average life would feel normal. But Walter is not average. Walter helped build a company. Walter contributed to Nobel Prize-winning research. Walter knows what he is capable of. And every single day of his ordinary life reminds him that he is not living up to that capability. That gap between what you know you can do and what your life actually looks like is one of the most painful psychological states a person can experience. It breeds resentment. It breeds bitterness. It breeds the kind of quiet rage that does not explode right away, but builds slowly over years until something finally sets it off. And that is the Walter White we meet in the pilot. A man who is drowning in an ordinary life. A man who smiles at his family and goes to work and pays his bills and does everything a good, responsible man is supposed to do. But inside, behind that calm face and that quiet voice, there is a storm. There is a man who feels robbed, a man who feels unseen, a man who feels like the world took everything he was supposed to have and gave it to other people instead. Walter White is not just unhappy, he is resentful. And resentment, when it sits inside someone for long enough without ever being addressed, becomes something dangerous. It becomes fuel. It just needs a spark. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And for Walter White, that spark was already lit long before the cancer. It was lit decades earlier, when he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A decision that involved a company, a woman, and a best friend who went on to become a billionaire without him. Section 2. The Gray Matter Wound, where the resentment was born. In Section 1, we talked about who Walter White was at the start of Breaking Bad. A man who felt invisible. A man who felt cheated by life. A man who walked through his days carrying a weight that nobody around him could see. But we also said something important at the end of that section. We said that the resentment inside Walter White did not begin with his cancer diagnosis. It did not begin with Bogdan humiliating him at the car wash, or Hank overshadowing him at family dinners. It began decades earlier, with a decision Walter made when he was still a young man. A decision that involved a company, a woman, and a friend. And that decision is arguably the single most important event in Walter White's entire life, because it set the foundation for everything that came after. It planted the seed of bitterness that would grow quietly inside him for over 20 years until it finally consumed him whole. This is the story of Gray Matter Technologies, and it is the wound that Walter White never allowed to heal. To understand gray matter, You have to go back to the 1980s, long before Breaking Bad even begins. Walter White was a student at the California Institute of Technology, known as Caltech. It is one of the most elite science universities in the world, and Walter was thriving there. He was brilliant, ambitious, and full of potential. At Caltech, he became best friends with another student named Elliot Schwartz. The two of them were inseparable. They studied together, worked on their thesis together, and even contributed to scientific research that helped their team win a Nobel Prize in chemistry. Walter White, the same man who would later be washing cars for minimum wage, once helped win a Nobel Prize. Let that sink in. These two young men were at the top of their field, and they had the kind of future most people can only dream about. After graduating, Walter and Elliot decided to take their partnership to the next level. They founded their own scientific research company together. They called it Gray Matter Technologies, and the name itself tells you something interesting about their friendship. Gray matter was not a random name. It came from combining their two last names, White, which is Walter's last name, and Schwartz, which is Elliot's last name. Schwartz is a German word that means black. So when you mix white and black together, you get gray. Gray matter. It was a name that represented both of them equally. A name that said this company belongs to both of us. They were partners in every sense of the word, and the company was built on the foundation of their shared work and shared genius. Around this same time, Walter hired a young lab assistant named Gretchen to work at Gray Matter. Gretchen was smart, talented, and matched both Walter and Elliot in terms of ability. She played an important role in conducting research and solving equations that pushed the company forward. And before long, Walter and Gretchen started dating. Their relationship became serious. According to some accounts, they were even engaged at one point. Everything in Walter's life was lining up perfectly. He had a groundbreaking company, a brilliant partner, and a woman he loved. He was on the path to becoming exactly the kind of man he always knew he could be. And then, in what might be the most consequential decision of his entire existence, Walter threw it all away. Here is what happened. Walter and Gretchen went to spend the 4th of July weekend with Gretchen's family. And when Walter got there, he realized something that shook him to his core. Gretchen's family was wealthy, not just comfortable, not just well off, but genuinely wealthy. They came from a prominent upper-class background, and Walter, standing in the middle of their world, suddenly felt like he did not belong. He felt small. He felt inferior. He felt like he was not good enough to be standing next to this woman and her family. And instead of talking about it, instead of working through those feelings like a mature adult, Walter did something drastic. He overreacted. He left. He walked away from Gretchen, walked away from their relationship, and walked away from Gray Matter Technologies entirely. Now this is important because for years, fans of Breaking Bad assumed that Elliot and Gretchen did something terrible to Walter. The show presents it in a way that makes you think Walter was betrayed, that he was pushed out, that his work was stolen from him. Walter himself tells the story that way throughout the series. He carries himself like a man who was wronged, like a victim of other people's greed. But the truth, as confirmed by the creator of the show Vince Gilligan himself in 2016, is very different. In an interview with the Huffington Post, Gilligan explained exactly why Walter left Gray Matter and Gretchen. He said that Walter did not realize how wealthy Gretchen's family was, and when he found out, it blew his mind and made him feel inferior. He overreacted and just checked out. Gilligan also said something crucial. He said that most viewers of Breaking Bad assume Gretchen and Elliot are the bad guys, and that Walter got cheated by them. But Gilligan himself never saw it that way. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that Walter's own feelings of not being good enough are what drove him away. Jessica Hecht, the actress who played Gretchen, backed this up in a separate interview with AMC. She confirmed that Walter left both the company and their relationship because he felt inferior. Not because anyone pushed him out. Not because anyone stole anything from him. He left because his own ego could not handle the idea that the woman he loved came from a world that was above him. And rather than face that insecurity, he ran from it. After leaving Gretchen, Walter sold his share of gray matter technologies to Elliot for $5,000. $5,000. At the time, the company was still in its early stages. Walter himself mentioned in Season 5, Episode 6, Buyout, that the company only had a few patents pending at that point. So $5,000 might have felt like real money to him back then. But here is the thing. After Walter left, Gretchen and Elliot continued building the company. They got married. They kept doing the research. They kept pushing the science forward. And gray matter technologies exploded. By the time of Breaking Bad's first season, the company was worth over $2 billion. $2.16 billion to be exact. That means Walter's original share of the company, the share he sold for $5,000, would have been worth an estimated $720 million. Walter White gave up $720 million because he felt inferior at a 4th of July barbecue. And he never got over it. Not for a single day. For the rest of his life, Walter carried that decision like a boulder on his back. But here's where the psychology gets really interesting. Instead of accepting that he was the one who made the choice to leave, Walter rewrote the story in his own mind. He convinced himself that Elliot and Gretchen were the villains. He told himself that they cut him out, that they stole his work, that they built their fortune on his research and left him with nothing. This is what he believes throughout the entire series, and he believes it so deeply, so completely, that it shapes every major decision he makes. You can see this resentment surface in Season 1, Episode 5, which is literally titled Gray Matter. Walter and Skylar are invited to Elliot's birthday party. The party is at a huge, fancy house, surrounded by wealthy people in expensive clothes. Walter is uncomfortable from the moment he walks in. He does not fit in. He is a high school teacher, standing in a room full of millionaires, and every second of it reminds him of what he walked away from. During the party, Elliot pulls Walter aside and offers him a job at Gray Matter. He tells Walter that the company could use a fresh pair of eyes, and he mentions that the health insurance is excellent. This is Elliot's way of reaching out. He knows about Walter's cancer diagnosis because Skylar told him, and he genuinely wants to help. Elliot even offers to pay for Walter's entire cancer treatment outright. And Walter refuses. He does not just politely decline. He becomes angry. He accuses Skylar of going behind his back and telling Elliot about his cancer. He sees the whole thing as charity, as pity, as a handout from the people who, in his mind, built their empire on his work and are now offering him scraps. The truth is that Elliot was being generous and sincere. But Walter cannot see it that way. His resentment has twisted the lens through which he views everything connected to gray matter. Every kind gesture from Elliot or Gretchen looks like an insult to him. Every offer of help feels like a reminder of what he lost. This refusal is one of the most important moments in the entire series because it reveals something fundamental about Walter's character. He would rather cook methamphetamine in a beaten-up RV in the desert with a former student than accept help from the people he blames for his failures. He would rather risk his life, his freedom, and his family's safety than swallow his pride and take a legitimate job at the company he helped create. That is how deep the wound goes. That is how powerful resentment becomes when you let it sit inside you for 20 years without ever dealing with it. The resentment boils over completely in Season 2, Episode 6, Peekaboo. Walter and Gretchen meet at a restaurant, and the conversation quickly turns ugly. Gretchen confronts him about lying to Skylar. See, Walter had told Skylar that Elliot and Gretchen were paying for his cancer treatment to cover up the fact that his drug money was actually funding it. When Gretchen found out about the lie, she wanted answers. But instead of explaining himself, Walter unleashes years of built-up fury. He attacks her verbally. He blames her and Elliot for everything. He accuses them of cutting him out and profiting off his genius. The scene ends with Walter being so cruel and nasty that Gretchen leaves the restaurant in tears. Their friendship, whatever was left of it, is completely destroyed in that moment. But here is what makes this scene so psychologically revealing. Walter's anger at Gretchen is not really about Gretchen. It is about himself. Deep down, in a place he refuses to look at honestly, Walter knows that he is the one who left. He is the one who sold his shares. He is the one who walked away. But admitting that would mean accepting that his ordinary life, his struggle, his financial problems, all of it is his own fault. And that is a truth that Walter White cannot face. So instead, he projects all of that self-directed anger outward. He blames Gretchen. He blames Elliot. He turns them into the villains of his story so that he can remain the victim. Because being a victim is easier than being the man who threw away his own future. Peter Gould, who co-ran Breaking Bad alongside Vince Gilligan and later created Better Call Saul, said something very telling about this. He said that the most interesting thing about the gray matter situation is not what actually happened between Walter, Elliot, and Gretchen. The most interesting thing is the fact that Walter never let it go. He held on to that resentment for over 20 years. He had no perspective on himself. He could not see his own role in what happened. All he could do was justify everything he had done and everything he was about to do by pointing at the people he blamed for ruining his life. And that justification carries through the entire series. In Season 5, Episode 6, Buyout, Walter tells Jesse Pinkman the story of gray matter. He tells him about the company he co-founded that is now worth over $2 billion. He tells him about selling his share for $5,000. And he tells Jesse this story at a very specific moment, right when Jesse and their partner Mike Ehrmantraut are ready to walk away from the meth business with $5 million each. Walter tells this story to explain why $5 million is not enough for him. Because he already made the mistake of walking away from a fortune once. He already watched someone else get rich off of what he helped build, and he refuses to let that happen again. He looks Jesse dead in the eyes and tells him that he is not in the money business or the meth business. He is in the empire business. That one line, the empire business, tells you exactly what gray matter did to Walter White's mind. It did not just make him bitter. It made him obsessed with proving that he could build something bigger than what he left behind, even if that something was a drug empire built on poison and death. The gray matter wound is the key to understanding everything Walter White does across all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad. It explains why he refuses help. It explains why he needs to earn his money his own way. It explains why being the best at cooking methamphetamine is not just a job for him, but a source of deep personal pride. It explains why he cannot walk away, even when he has made more than enough money to provide for his family 10 times over. Because for Walter White, the meth was never just about money. It was about proving to himself and to the world that he is not the man who let his fortune slip through his fingers. It was about making sure that this time, nobody takes credit for what he built. This time, everyone will know his name. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that need for recognition, that hunger to be seen as important and powerful and brilliant, did not just shape how Walter built his empire. It shaped how he carried himself while doing it. Because once the cancer gave him permission to stop being the quiet, obedient man the world expected him to be, something else happened. Something much darker. Walter White did not just start breaking the law. He started breaking free from the version of himself that he had been pretending to be for over 2 decades. And the question that would come to define the entire series is whether the cancer actually changed him, or whether it simply revealed who he had been all along. Section 3. Cancer as a catalyst, not a cause. The psychology of mortality. At the end of Section 2, we left off with a question that sits at the heart of everything Breaking Bad is about. Did the cancer change Walter White? Or did it simply reveal who he had always been underneath? It is a question that fans have debated for years, and it is a question that does not have a simple answer. But what we can say with certainty is this: the cancer did not come out of nowhere and turn a good man into a bad one. Walter White was already carrying decades of resentment, bitterness, wounded pride, and suppressed anger long before any doctor ever looked at his chest and saw something wrong. The gray matter wound had been festering inside of him for over 20 years. The feelings of being undervalued, overlooked, and cheated had become such a permanent part of who he was that he probably could not even remember what it felt like to live without them. So when the cancer arrived, it did not create a new Walter White. It unlocked the one that had been trapped inside the old one for his entire adult life. And understanding how that happened, understanding what a death sentence does to the human mind, is the key to understanding why Walter White did what he did. Walter's cancer diagnosis happens in the very first episode of Breaking Bad. It is a regular day. He is at work, teaching chemistry to a room full of teenagers who are not paying attention. And then he collapses. He just drops. His body gives out on him, right there in front of his students. And the next thing we see is Walter in a hospital, lying on a bed, staring at a doctor who is telling him something that no person ever wants to hear. He has lung cancer, stage 3, inoperable. And just like that, the entire direction of Walter White's life changes forever. But here is the thing that most people do not think about carefully enough. It is not the cancer itself that changes Walter. It is what the cancer takes away from him. And what it takes away is something that most of us do not even realize we carry around with us every single day. It takes away the future. Think about how most people live their lives. We wake up, go to work, deal with things we do not like, swallow our frustrations, and move on. We do this because somewhere in the back of our minds, we believe we have time. We believe there will be a tomorrow, and a next week, and a next year. That belief in the future is what keeps most people in line. It is the reason you do not quit your job in the middle of a bad day. It is the reason you do not say everything you are really thinking to the people who frustrate you. It is the reason you follow the rules, even when the rules feel unfair. Because you know that your actions today will have consequences tomorrow, and you want tomorrow to be okay. You are protecting a future version of yourself that you assume will exist. But what happens when that future disappears? What happens when a doctor tells you that the tomorrow you have been planning for might not come? That is exactly what happens to Walter White. And the answer is that everything changes. Not because the cancer makes him a different person, but because the cancer removes the one thing that was keeping his true self hidden: the fear of consequences. Before the diagnosis, Walter had every reason to stay in line. He had a family to protect. He had a reputation to maintain. He had a job, a mortgage, a life that depended on him being a responsible, law-abiding man. The cost of stepping out of line was too high. If he got caught doing something illegal, he would lose everything: his family, his freedom, his place in the world. So he kept his head down. He swallowed his pride at the car wash. He let Hank overshadow him at family gatherings. He accepted a paycheck that did not come close to matching what his brain was worth. He did all of this because the future demanded it. But the moment that future was taken away, the math changed. When you are already dying, what exactly are you afraid of? Prison? You might not live long enough to serve the sentence. Shame? You will not be around to feel it. Death? It is already coming whether you cook meth or not. The cancer did not give Walter a reason to break the law. It took away his reason not to. And you can see this shift happen almost immediately. In the pilot episode, right after the diagnosis, Walter goes on a ride-along with Hank to observe a drug bust. This is not something the old Walter would have done. The old Walter would have gone home, sat on the couch, and quietly processed his fear. But this Walter, the one who just found out he is dying, is suddenly curious. He wants to see what the other side looks like. And during that ride-along, he spots someone climbing out of a window to escape the bust. It is Jesse Pinkman, his former student. And in that moment, an idea begins to form. Not a fully developed plan, not yet, but a seed. A thought that says, maybe there is another way. Maybe his chemistry knowledge, the same knowledge that has been wasted on ungrateful teenagers for years, could actually be worth something. Maybe he does not have to die as the man the world forgot. What happens next is one of the most telling sequences in the entire series. Walter tracks Jesse down and essentially forces him into a partnership. He blackmails Jesse by threatening to turn him into Hank unless Jesse agrees to cook meth with him. And here is what is important about this moment. Walter does not agonize over the decision. He does not spend weeks going back and forth. He moves quickly, decisively, and with a confidence that feels completely out of character for the man we met just a few scenes earlier. That speed tells you something. It tells you that the desire to do something big, something that matched his intelligence and his ambition, was already inside of him. It was not something he had to build from scratch. It was something he just had to stop holding back. The first cook in the RV is another revealing moment. Walter and Jesse drive out into the desert in Jesse's beaten-up recreational vehicle, set up a mobile lab, and cook their first batch of methamphetamine. And Walter is good at it. He is not just good at it, he is extraordinary at it. The product he creates is almost perfectly pure, far beyond anything Jesse or any other street-level cook has ever seen. And you can see something happen to Walter in that moment. You can see a light come back on in his eyes. For the first time in years, maybe decades, Walter White is using his full ability. He is solving problems. He is applying his knowledge. He is doing something that challenges him intellectually. And the result is not just a batch of meth. The result is a feeling of being alive, a feeling of being relevant, a feeling of mattering. That feeling is what hooks Walter. Not the money, not the danger, not the criminal lifestyle. The feeling that he is finally doing something worthy of who he actually is. Now here is where a lot of people get the story wrong. They look at the cancer diagnosis and they say, Walter White was a desperate father who turned to crime to pay for his treatment and leave money behind for his family. And yes, that is what Walter tells himself. That is what he tells Skylar. That is what he tells Jesse. That is what he tells anyone who questions his choices. The family excuse is the story Walter wraps around everything he does, like a protective shield. But the show gives us very clear evidence, right from the very first season, that the family excuse is not the whole truth. Because Walter is given a completely legal, completely safe way to solve every single one of his financial problems. And he turns it down flat. In Season 1, Episode 5, Gray Matter, Elliot Schwartz offers to pay for Walter's entire cancer treatment. He does not offer it as a loan. He does not attach conditions to it. He simply says he wants to help his old friend. And later, Elliot goes even further and offers Walter a job at Gray Matter Technologies, a job that comes with excellent health insurance that would cover everything. This is the answer to every problem Walter claims to have. No more financial stress. No more worrying about leaving his family with medical debt. No more need to cook a single gram of methamphetamine ever again. All Walter has to do is say yes. But he does not say yes. He says no, and he does not just say no quietly. He becomes furious. He accuses Skylar of going behind his back by telling Elliot about the cancer. He treats the entire offer like it is an insult, like Elliot is rubbing his success in Walter's face by offering charity. This is the moment that exposes what the cancer really did to Walter White. It did not make him desperate. It made him honest. For the first time in his life, Walter stopped pretending that he was okay with being ordinary. He stopped pretending that he was fine being the quiet, agreeable man who takes whatever life gives him. The cancer gave him permission to finally admit, at least to himself, that he wanted more, that he deserved more, that he was not going to spend his last months on Earth accepting handouts from the man who got rich off of a company Walter helped build. The rejection of Elliot's offer has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with pride. Walter would rather die cooking meth in the desert than live on Elliot Schwartz's generosity. And that tells you everything about what is really driving him. The family later holds an intervention to convince Walter to accept treatment. Skylar wants him to fight the cancer. Walt Jr. is emotional, telling his father that refusing treatment feels like giving up, like he is giving up on his own son. Hank and Marie weigh in too. It is a room full of people who love Walter and want him to live. And Walter sits there and listens to all of it, and then he calmly says no. He tells them he does not want treatment. He has made his decision. And the way he delivers that refusal is striking. There is no anger. There is no sadness. There is almost a sense of peace, like a man who has finally stopped fighting against something he has been struggling with for years. Walter has made a choice, and the choice is not about chemotherapy. The choice is about control. For the first time in as long as he can remember, Walter White is the one making the decisions about his own life. Not Skylar, not Hank, not Bogdan, not Elliot. Him. The next morning, Walter changes his mind. He tells Skylar he will do the treatment, but the key detail is how he plans to pay for it. He tells her he will take care of Elliot's check, implying that he will accept the money, but he does not accept the money. When Gretchen calls to follow up, Walter lies and tells her his insurance will now cover the cost. He has no intention of taking a single dollar from gray matter. He is going to pay for his treatment himself, with money he earns himself, through the only thing that has ever made him feel truly alive. The meth, the chemistry, the work that only he can do at the level that he does it. And this is what the cancer really did to Walter White. It did not transform him into a criminal. It burned away the mask he had been wearing for 20 years. It removed the patience, the tolerance, the willingness to accept less than he believed he deserved. It stripped him down to his most basic, most honest self. And that self was not a humble family man. That self was a proud, ambitious, deeply resentful man who had spent his entire adult life pretending to be something smaller than he was. The cancer did not give Walter White a new personality. It gave him a deadline, and with that deadline came urgency. An urgency to build, to prove, to achieve, to matter. Not tomorrow, not next year, right now. Because right now was all he had left. Bryan Cranston, the actor who played Walter White, once said something that captures this idea perfectly. He said that given the right set of circumstances, anyone could become a completely different person. And that is what the cancer was for Walter. It was the right set of circumstances. It was the push that sent a boulder rolling downhill after it had been sitting still at the edge of a cliff for decades. The boulder was always there. The potential energy was always stored inside it. The cancer just gave it the nudge it needed to start moving. And once it started, there was no stopping it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But a man running on resentment and a ticking clock still needs a way to separate himself from the terrible things he is about to do. He needs a way to look in the mirror and not see a criminal staring back. He needs a wall between the father who reads bedtime stories to his daughter and the man who cooks poison in the desert. And that is exactly what Walter White built for himself. He did not just start a drug operation. He created an entirely new identity. A name, a look, a persona that could do the things Walter White never could. And that persona would go on to become one of the most feared names in the entire American Southwest. Section 4. The Birth of Heisenberg. Ego, alter egos, and psychological compartmentalization. At the end of Section 3, we talked about how Walter White needed something more than just a reason to cook meth. He needed a way to do it without falling apart. He needed a wall between who he was at home and who he was becoming in the desert. Because the truth is, no matter how much resentment was living inside Walter White, no matter how badly he wanted to prove himself, he was still a man with a family. He was still a man who kissed his wife goodnight and ate breakfast with his son every morning. And the things he was about to do, the lies he was about to tell, the laws he was about to break, those things do not sit comfortably next to pancakes and family dinners. So Walter did something that would define the rest of the series. He did not just become a criminal. He created a completely separate version of himself to be the criminal for him. He gave that version a name, a look, and a reputation. And the moment that version stepped into the world, Walter White began to disappear. The name he chose was Heisenberg, and the story of how that name came to exist is one of the most important moments in the entire show. It happens in Season 1, Episode 6, titled Crazy Handful of Nothing. By this point in the series, Walter and Jesse have cooked several batches of meth, and they have been trying to sell their product through a violent, unpredictable drug distributor named Tuco Salamanca. But things have gone badly. Jesse went to Tuco to try and set up a deal on his own, and Tuco beat him nearly to death. He hospitalized Jesse, stole the meth without paying for it, and sent a very clear message that he was not someone to be messed with. Jesse is lying in a hospital bed, broken and bruised, and Walter is standing at a crossroads. He can walk away. He can accept that this world is too dangerous for a high school chemistry teacher. Or he can do something about it. Walter chooses to do something about it. But he does not go to Tuco as Walter White. Before he makes his move, something else happens first. Earlier in the episode, Walter's chemotherapy has started causing his hair to fall out. He is standing in front of his bathroom mirror, pulling clumps of hair from his head, watching pieces of himself literally come apart in his hands. And instead of waiting for the rest to fall out on its own, Walter picks up a razor and shaves his entire head clean. It is a small moment, but it changes everything. Because when Walter looks in the mirror after shaving his head, he does not see the same man. The familiar face, the thinning hair, the look of a tired teacher, all of that is gone. What stares back at him is someone harder, someone sharper, someone new. Bryan Cranston, the actor who played Walter, explained this moment in interviews. He said that Walter takes on the new name and the new look specifically so that he does not recognize himself. He said that as long as Walter does not recognize the man in the mirror, he can keep going. He can keep doing things that Walter White would never do, because in his mind, it is not Walter White doing them. With his newly shaved head, Walter walks into Tuco's headquarters carrying a bag. Tuco's men pat him down and let him through. Tuco does not take him seriously. Why would he? Walter looks like a middle-aged man with cancer who wandered into the wrong building. Tuco asks him who he is, and this is the moment. Walter does not say his real name. He does not say he is Jesse's partner. He looks Tuco dead in the face and says one word: Heisenberg. It is the first time the name is ever spoken in the series. And then, before Tuco or anyone else in the room can react, Walter takes a piece of what he says is meth out of his bag and throws it on the ground. But it is not meth. It is fulminated mercury, a chemical compound that is extremely sensitive to impact. The moment it hits the floor, it explodes. The blast blows out the windows, sends Tuco and his men flying, and fills the room with smoke and chaos. And Walter, standing in the middle of all of it, is completely calm. He is not shaking. He is not panicking. He is in control. He demands his money, plus extra for Jesse's pain and suffering. And Tuco, for the first time in his life, does what someone else tells him to do. He pays up. Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, has said that this moment is the one where Walter truly breaks bad. Not the first cook, not the first lie, this one. Because this is the moment where Walter stops reacting to the criminal world and starts commanding it. He walks into a room full of dangerous men and bends them to his will, using nothing but chemistry and fearlessness. And he does it under a name that is not his own. That separation is the key to everything. The name Heisenberg itself is not random. It comes from Werner Heisenberg, a real physicist who is most famous for something called the uncertainty principle. Now, we are not going to get into the deep science of it, because that is not what matters here. What matters is the basic idea behind it. And the basic idea is this: you cannot know everything about something at the same time. You can know where something is, or you can know how fast it is moving, but you cannot know both at once. There is always something uncertain. There is always something you cannot pin down. And that idea mirrors Walter White perfectly, because from the moment he takes on the Heisenberg name, you can never be fully sure which version of him you are dealing with. Is he the family man or the drug lord? Is he the caring father or the ruthless killer? Is he Walter White or Heisenberg? The answer changes depending on when you are looking and who he is standing in front of. He becomes impossible to pin down, just like the principle his new name is borrowed from. But Heisenberg is more than just a name. It is a complete identity, and Walter builds it piece by piece over the course of the series. The shaved head is the first step. Then comes the hat. The black pork pie hat that would become one of the most recognizable images in all of television. Walter starts wearing it whenever he is doing business as Heisenberg. It sits on his head like a crown, transforming his silhouette from a soft, forgettable teacher into something intimidating and deliberate. The hat is not just a fashion choice. It is a costume. It is armor. It is the thing Walter puts on when he needs to stop being Walter and start being the man who knocks on doors, the man who makes demands, the man who people fear. And when the hat comes off, when he goes back home to Skylar and Walt Jr., he tries to go back to being the old Walter, the quiet one, the safe one, the one who would never hurt anyone. This is what makes Walter White so fascinating and so terrifying at the same time. He is not just a man who does bad things. He is a man who has built an entire system inside his own mind that allows him to do bad things without feeling like a bad person. When Heisenberg poisons someone, that is not Walter's fault, because Walter was not there. When Heisenberg threatens someone's life, Walter can go home and sleep in his bed next to his wife, because in his mind, he was not the one making those threats. The wall between Walter and Heisenberg lets him live in two worlds at the same time: father and drug lord, teacher and killer, loving husband and dangerous criminal. He keeps these two lives in completely separate boxes inside his head, and as long as those boxes stay closed, he can function. He can convince himself that he is still a good man, doing what he has to do for his family. This mental trick of keeping conflicting parts of your life in separate boxes is something that people do in real life all the time, though usually not to this extreme. A person might behave completely differently at work than they do at home. Someone might say one thing to one group of friends and the opposite to another group. We all have different versions of ourselves that we show to different people in different situations. But for most people, those versions are not that far apart. The gap between who you are at work and who you are at home is usually small enough that it does not cause any real damage. With Walter White, the gap is a canyon. The distance between who he is as a father and who he is as Heisenberg is so enormous that maintaining both identities requires constant lying, constant performance, and a level of mental separation that would break most people. And for a while, it works. Through the first 2 seasons of Breaking Bad, Walter manages to keep the two worlds apart. He cooks meth in the desert and comes home to dinner with his family. He meets with drug dealers and then helps Walt Jr. with his homework. He lies to Skylar about where he has been, and she believes him because the idea that her husband could be doing what he is actually doing is so far outside the realm of possibility that it does not even cross her mind. Walter is living a double life, and the Heisenberg identity is what makes it possible. It gives him a place to put all of the darkness, all of the violence, all of the moral compromise, without it bleeding into his home life. Or at least, that is the plan. But here is the problem with building a wall inside your own mind. Walls crack. And the longer Walter lives as Heisenberg, the harder it becomes to keep the two identities separate. You start to see it in small moments throughout the series. Moments where Heisenberg leaks into Walter's home life. Like in Season 2, when Walter is sitting at the dinner table with Skylar and Hank starts talking about the blue meth that has been showing up on the streets. The meth that Walter made. Hank has no idea he is talking about his own brother-in-law's product. And Walter sits there listening, and you can see something on his face. Not fear, not guilt, pride. He is proud that his meth is being talked about. He is proud that it is so good, so pure, so distinctive that even the DEA has taken notice. That pride belongs to Heisenberg, but it is showing up on Walter White's face at the family dinner table. The wall is already starting to crack. Another moment comes in Season 3, when Walt Jr. starts a website to raise money for Walter's cancer treatment. The website is called SaveWalterWhite.com, and Walter, who is sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars in drug money that he cannot explain, has to sit there and watch his son beg strangers on the internet for donations. The humiliation of it eats at him. Because Heisenberg is rich. Heisenberg is powerful. Heisenberg could solve this problem in an instant. But Walter White cannot. Because Walter White is not supposed to have that kind of money. The frustration of having to pretend to be powerless when you know you are anything but powerless starts to wear on him. The two identities are pulling in opposite directions, and it is only a matter of time before something gives. Perhaps the most telling early sign of Heisenberg taking over comes in Season 2, Episode 10, when Walter is waiting in a home improvement store and notices a man buying supplies to cook meth. The man is clearly an amateur, buying the wrong ingredients and looking nervous. And Walter, instead of minding his own business, walks up to the man and tells him to stay out of his territory. This is not something Walter White would ever do. Walter White would have kept his head down and walked away. But Heisenberg cannot tolerate the idea of someone else operating in his space, even someone who is no real threat to him. The ego of Heisenberg has grown so large that it is now making decisions for Walter in situations that have nothing to do with his business. The persona is no longer just a mask Walter puts on when he needs to be tough. It is becoming who he actually is. And that is the tragedy of the Heisenberg identity. Walter created it as a tool, a way to protect himself mentally from the things he needed to do, a way to be a criminal without feeling like one. But tools have a way of becoming habits, and habits have a way of becoming who you are. Over the course of 5 seasons, the line between Walter and Heisenberg does not just blur, it disappears. The man who once needed a fake name and a black hat to walk into a room full of criminals eventually does not need the costume at all. Because Heisenberg is no longer a character Walter is playing. Heisenberg is who Walter has become. And the quiet, mild-mannered teacher who created him in the first place? That man is the one who becomes the performance. Walter White built Heisenberg to protect himself. But in the end, Heisenberg is what destroyed him. Because once you let the darkest version of yourself out of its cage and give it a name and a reputation and a taste of power, putting it back becomes almost impossible. The alter ego that was supposed to keep Walter's two lives separate ended up swallowing one of them whole. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Heisenberg did not become a monster overnight. That transformation happened step by step, choice by choice, kill by kill. And the very first step, the one that cracked the foundation of Walter White's morality and set him on a path he could never come back from, happened in a basement with a bike lock and a broken plate. Section 5. The first kill. Crazy 8 and the erosion of moral boundaries. At the end of Section 4, we talked about how Walter White created Heisenberg as a separate identity, a mask he could put on to do things that Walter White would never do. But masks are only useful if the person wearing them can still take them off. And the moment that truly tested whether Walter could still separate himself from the violence of his new life did not happen in Tuco's office. It did not happen during a drug deal or a confrontation with a rival. It happened in a quiet basement with a man chained to a pole and a decision that would change Walter White forever. The killing of Crazy 8 is not just the first murder Walter commits in Breaking Bad. It is the moment where the floor cracks underneath his feet and the long, slow fall into darkness truly begins. To understand how Walter ended up in this situation, you have to go back to the very first episode. After deciding to cook meth with Jesse Pinkman, Walter needs a way to sell the product. Jesse connects him with a local drug dealer and distributor named Crazy 8, whose real name is Domingo Gallardo Molina. Crazy 8 is not some high-level cartel boss. He is a mid-level dealer who operates in the Albuquerque area. His father owns a furniture store called Tampico Furniture on Manal Boulevard, and Crazy 8 himself has a degree in business administration from the University of New Mexico. He even once considered studying music at Oberlin College or Berklee College of Music before his father talked him out of it. The point is that Crazy 8 is not a faceless villain. He is a real person with a real background, and that detail becomes extremely important later. The plan is simple. Walter and Jesse cook a batch of meth, and then Jesse brings Crazy 8 and his cousin Emilio Koyama out to the desert to see the product and make a deal. But the plan falls apart almost immediately. Emilio had recently been arrested on drug charges and was busted during a raid that Hank Schrader, Walter's own brother-in-law, was part of. When Emilio sees Walter at the cook site, he recognizes him. He remembers seeing Walter with Hank during the ride-along in the pilot episode. Emilio immediately assumes that Walter is a DEA informant. He and Crazy 8 turn on Walter and Jesse. They force Walter into the RV at gunpoint. They are going to kill him. And this is where Walter's chemistry saves his life for the first time, but certainly not the last. Thinking fast, Walter tells Crazy 8 and Emilio that he will show them his recipe, his cooking process. But instead of cooking meth, he creates a chemical reaction that produces phosphine gas, a deadly, toxic gas. He throws the ingredients together, runs out of the RV, and jams the door shut behind him, trapping Crazy 8 and Emilio inside with the gas. Emilio dies almost immediately. Crazy 8 survives, but barely. He stumbles out of the RV, badly hurt, and collapses. Now Walter and Jesse have a serious problem. Emilio is dead inside the RV, and Crazy 8 is alive, but needs to be dealt with. Jesse and Walter flip a coin to decide who handles which task. Jesse gets the job of disposing of Emilio's body. Walter gets the job of dealing with Crazy 8. They take Crazy 8 back to Jesse's house and chain him up in the basement, using a bicycle lock around his neck attached to a metal pole. And this is where the real psychological story begins. Because what follows is not a quick, ruthless execution. What follows is one of the most painful, drawn-out moral struggles in the entire series. The situation is laid out in Season 1, Episode 3, titled, "And the Bags in the River." Walter knows what he has to do. Crazy 8 has seen his face. Crazy 8 knows who he is. If Walter lets him go, Crazy 8 will come back for him and his family. The logical choice is clear. But Walter White is not a killer. At least, not yet. He is a 50-year-old chemistry teacher who has never committed a violent act in his life. The idea of killing another human being, of looking a man in the eyes and ending his life, is something so far outside of Walter's experience that he simply cannot bring himself to do it. And so he stalls. He delays. He finds every possible reason to put off the decision. And then he does something that reveals exactly who Walter White still is at this point in the story. He sits down and writes a list. A pros and cons list. On a piece of paper, with a line drawn down the middle, Walter writes out every reason he can think of to let Crazy 8 live on the left side, and every reason to kill him on the right side. The left side fills up quickly. Reasons like, it is wrong to kill someone. It goes against every moral teaching he has ever followed. Crazy 8 is a human being. Murder is fundamentally wrong. He has a family too. Walter writes reason after reason on the left, filling the column with arguments for mercy. And on the right side, the side for killing him, there is only one entry. Just one sentence. It reads, "He'll kill your entire family if you let him go." The entire weight of the decision comes down to that single line. But even that is not enough to push Walter over the edge. Not yet. Instead of acting on the logic of his own list, Walter does something else. He starts taking care of Crazy 8. He brings him sandwiches. He brings him beer. He starts having conversations with him. Real conversations. Not the kind of talk you have with someone you are planning to kill. Walter asks Crazy 8 about his life, and Crazy 8 tells him. He talks about his father's furniture store. He talks about his background. He talks about his real name, Domingo. And Walter listens. He makes connections. He realizes that he might have even met Crazy 8 years ago, back when Walter was a customer at Tampico Furniture. These conversations are not Walter's way of interrogating his prisoner. They are Walter's way of trying to talk himself out of murder. He is humanizing Crazy 8 on purpose. He is trying to make him into a real person. A person with a family and a history and a name. Because real people are harder to kill than strangers. Walter is desperately searching for a reason. Any reason. To unlock that bike lock and let this man walk out of the basement alive. And it almost works. During one of their longer conversations, Walter sits with Crazy 8 in the basement and reveals something deeply personal. He tells Crazy 8 that he has lung cancer. This is significant because at this point in the series, Walter has barely told anyone about his diagnosis. He has not even fully processed it himself. But he tells Crazy 8. He shares this intimate, terrifying piece of his life with a man who is chained to a pole in a basement. And that tells you how conflicted Walter is. He is not bonding with Crazy 8 because he wants to. He is bonding with him because he needs to. He needs to believe that there is a way out of this that does not involve him becoming a murderer. He needs to believe that if he just gets to know this man well enough, he will find a reason to let him go. After this conversation, Walter makes his decision. He is going to release Crazy 8. He has talked himself into it. He has decided that maybe, just maybe, Crazy 8 will keep his word and walk away and never come after him. Walter gets up, goes upstairs, and starts looking for the key to the bicycle lock. But as he is about to head back down to the basement, he walks past the garbage can in the kitchen. And he stops. Something catches his eye. He looks into the garbage and sees the broken pieces of a plate. Earlier, Walter had brought Crazy 8 a sandwich on a plate, and at some point he had collapsed from a coughing fit, falling to the floor and shattering the plate on the concrete. Walter had cleaned up the pieces afterward. But now, standing over the garbage can, he starts counting the shards. He picks them up. He pieces them together like a puzzle. And when he puts them all together, he realizes that one piece is missing. A large, jagged shard of the broken plate is not in the garbage, which means it is still in the basement. Which means Crazy 8 took it while Walter was unconscious on the floor during his coughing fit. Crazy 8 has been hiding a weapon this entire time, waiting for the moment Walter gets close enough to use it on. Everything changes in that instant. All of the conversations, the sandwiches, the beer, the bonding, the hope that there might be a peaceful way out of this. All of it collapses. Crazy 8 was never going to walk away. He was never going to keep his word. He was waiting to kill Walter the moment he got the chance. And Walter now knows it. He walks back down to the basement with the key, and the look on his face is not anger. It is not determination. It is grief. He is heartbroken, because despite everything, he truly did not want this. He truly wanted to believe that there was another way. And now that hope is gone. Walter confronts Crazy 8. He does not accuse him directly at first. He stands there, key in hand, and gives Crazy 8 one last chance. One last moment to come clean. But Crazy 8 sticks to his story. He swears he will not come after Walter. He promises that everything will be fine. He looks Walter in the eyes and lies. And Walter knows he is lying, because he knows about the missing shard. And then Walter makes his move. He grabs the bicycle lock from behind, pulls it tight around Crazy 8's throat, and strangles him. Crazy 8 fights back. He thrashes and kicks and claws. He grabs the hidden plate shard and drives it into Walter's leg, cutting him. But Walter does not let go. He braces his foot against the pole and pulls with everything he has. He is sobbing the entire time. Tears are streaming down his face as he chokes the life out of a man he spent days trying to save. And finally, after what feels like an eternity, Crazy 8 goes limp. He is dead, and Walter collapses on the floor next to him, weeping. This is Walter White's first deliberate killing. Not a panicked reaction like the phosphine gas in the RV. Not an accident. A conscious, premeditated act, and the emotional devastation it causes him is real. In the moments after Crazy 8 dies, Walter is completely broken. He sits on the floor of that basement, shaking and crying, looking at what he has done. He is horrified by himself. He cannot believe that he, Walter White, high school chemistry teacher, father of 2, has just strangled a man to death with a bicycle lock. The weight of it is crushing. This is a man whose moral limits are still very much intact at this point. The killing hurts him deeply. But here is the part that matters most for the rest of the series. Walter does not stop. He is devastated by killing Crazy 8, yes. He is traumatized by it, yes. But he does not walk away from the meth business. He does not call the police. He does not tell Skylar what happened and ask for help. He buries what he has done inside himself, right next to the resentment and the pride and the ambition that were already living there. And he keeps going. And that is the real psychological turning point. Not the killing itself, but what comes after. Because what this moment teaches Walter, even if he does not realize it yet, is that he is capable of crossing lines he once thought were permanent. Lines that he believed, truly believed, he would never cross. He killed a man, and the world did not end. The sky did not fall. His family did not find out. Life continued. And that terrible lesson, that you can do something unforgivable and still wake up the next morning and eat breakfast with your children, is the lesson that opens the door to everything that follows. Each kill after Crazy 8 becomes a little easier. Each moral line becomes a little blurrier. The guilt fades a little faster each time. By season 3, Walter is making calculated decisions about who lives and who dies, with a clarity that would have been impossible for the man crying on that basement floor in season 1. By season 5, he is orchestrating the murders of 10 people across 3 prisons in a 2-minute window, without so much as a flinch. The distance between the man who sobbed while killing Crazy 8 and the man who calmly watches a prison assassination montage is staggering. But that distance was not covered in one leap. It was covered one small step at a time. And the first step was taken in Jesse Pinkman's basement with a bicycle lock and a broken plate. There is one more detail from this episode that deserves attention. During a flashback, we see a younger Walter White standing in a classroom with Gretchen, back when they were still working together. They are trying to account for every chemical element that makes up the human body. They go through the list: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, calcium, phosphorus, all of it. And when they add everything up, they come up short. There is a fraction of a percentage that they cannot account for. Something is missing. Gretchen suggests that maybe the missing piece is the soul. Walter dismisses the idea. He says there is nothing mystical about it. There is just chemistry. That flashback, placed right alongside the story of Walter killing Crazy 8, is no accident. Vince Gilligan put those scenes together on purpose. Because the question the episode is really asking is not whether Walter can kill Crazy 8. The question is whether there is something inside Walter White beyond the chemistry. Something that cannot be measured or calculated. A soul. A conscience. A line that he will not cross no matter what. And by the end of the episode, we start to get our answer. There might be a soul in there, but it is not strong enough to stop what is coming. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because the killing of Crazy 8 did not just break a moral barrier for Walter White. It revealed something about himself that he could never unsee. It showed him that the rules he thought he lived by, the limits he thought defined him, were not as solid as he believed. And once you learn that about yourself, once you discover that you are capable of things you thought were impossible, it changes how you see everything. It changes how you see other people. It changes how you see yourself. And in Walter White's case, it changed how he saw the entire world around him. Because the man who walked out of that basement was not the same man who walked in. He looked the same. He sounded the same. He went home to the same family and the same house and the same life. But something behind his eyes was different now. Something had shifted, and that shift would eventually grow into something much bigger. Something with a clinical name and a textbook definition that fits Walter White like a glove. Section 6. Narcissistic Personality. The clinical case for Walter White. At the end of Section 5, we talked about how the killing of Crazy 8 changed something fundamental inside Walter White. It showed him that the moral limits he believed in were not as permanent as he thought. It cracked the foundation. And once that foundation was cracked, something else started to grow through the gap. Something that had always been there, buried under years of quiet living and forced humility, but that now had room to spread. Because as Walter moved deeper into the criminal world, as he gained more power and more money and more control, a pattern started to emerge. A pattern that was not just about greed or ambition. It was about something much more personal. It was about Walter White's need to be seen as the most important person in every room he walked into. His need to be admired. His need to be feared. His need to be recognized as special. And when you lay out all of those needs side by side and look at them honestly, they point to something very specific, something that multiple academic papers, clinical psychologists, and character analysts have identified in Walter White over the years. They point to a personality built around one central belief, that Walter White is better than everyone else, and that the world owes him for not recognizing it sooner. Now, before we go further, let us be clear about something. Walter White is a fictional character. Nobody can actually sit him down in a therapist's office and run a formal evaluation. But the writers of Breaking Bad built his behavior so carefully, so consistently, and with so much psychological detail that professionals in the real world have been able to analyze him the same way they would analyze a real patient. Dr.
Todd Grande, a licensed professional counselor with a popular YouTube channel dedicated to personality analysis, did a detailed breakdown of Walter White using the 5 major traits that psychologists use to understand personality.
Emma Bergquist, a student at Butler University, published an academic essay in 2021 examining Walter White through a clinical lens, and a research paper by Ishwa Arshad looked at Walter White's behavior through the framework of self-psychology, a branch of psychological theory developed by a man named Heinz Kohut. All of these analyses arrive at the same basic conclusion. Walter White displays a deeply rooted pattern of behavior that revolves around an inflated sense of his own importance, a constant need for admiration from others, and a lack of genuine concern for the people around him. So let us walk through the evidence. And we are going to do this the same way a psychologist would. We are going to look at Walter White's actual behavior across the series and match it up against the traits that define this kind of personality. There are 9 traits that clinicians look for. You do not need to have all 9 to fit the pattern. You typically need to show at least 5. Walter White shows all 9. The first trait is a grand sense of self-importance. This means the person believes they are better, smarter, or more talented than others, and they expect to be recognized as such, even when their achievements do not match up. Walter White displays this from the very beginning of the series. He genuinely believes that his intelligence makes him superior to everyone around him. And to be fair, Walter is extremely smart. But his sense of his own importance goes far beyond quiet confidence. It becomes the lens through which he views every interaction. When Jesse questions one of his decisions, Walter takes it as a personal insult. When Gail Boddicker, a talented chemist in his own right, is brought in to work alongside him in Gus Fring's lab, Walter is not grateful for the help. He sees Gail as a potential replacement and a threat to his position as the best. His self-importance is not about being confident. It is about needing everyone around him to confirm that he is the smartest person alive. The second trait is being consumed by fantasies of unlimited success and power. This one is almost too easy with Walter White. In Season 5, Episode 6, Buyout, Jesse Pinkman and Mike Ehrmantraut are ready to leave the meth business. They have a buyer willing to pay $5 million each for their share of a stolen methylamine supply. $5 million. That is life-changing money for anyone. But Walter refuses. He does not want $5 million. He tells Jesse the story of Gray Matter Technologies, about how he sold his share of a billion-dollar company for $5,000. And then he says the line that defines his entire character from this point forward. He tells Jesse that he is not in the money business or the meth business. He is in the empire business. That is not the language of a man trying to provide for his family. That is the language of a man who is dreaming about power on a scale that has nothing to do with money. The third trait is believing that you are special or unique, and that only other special people can truly understand you. Walter shows this constantly. He does not respect the opinions of people he considers beneath him, which is almost everyone. The only people he shows genuine intellectual respect toward are those who can match him in some way. He briefly bonds with Gail Bedecker over their shared love of chemistry. He shows a grudging respect for Gus Fring's business mind. But the moment anyone challenges him or makes him feel ordinary, the admiration disappears and is replaced by hostility. The fourth trait is requiring excessive admiration. The best example of this in the entire series is the Say My Name scene in Season 5, Episode 7. Walter meets with a rival drug distributor named Declan in the desert. Declan has been buying meth from Mike's connection, but Walter wants to take over that supply line. So Walter stands in the middle of the desert, surrounded by armed men, and demands that Declan say his name. Not his real name, his other name. Declan resists at first, but Walter pushes. He tells Declan that he is the man who killed Gus Fring. He is the cook who produces the famous blue meth. He is the one everyone has been hearing about. And finally, Declan says it. Heisenberg. And Walter responds with 2 words. You're goddamn right. That moment is not about business strategy. It is about Walter needing to hear someone acknowledge who he is. He needs the admiration. He needs the recognition. He needs people to say his name with respect and fear. And he will stand in the middle of a desert, surrounded by guns, to get it. The fifth trait is a sense of entitlement. This means believing that you deserve special treatment simply because of who you are. Walter shows this when he buys the A1A car wash from Bogdan in Season 4. On the surface, this purchase makes sense as a money laundering operation, but Walter does not just buy the car wash because he needs it. He buys it because Bogdan humiliated him for years when he worked there. And on the day the sale goes through, Walter makes a point of taking the very first dollar Bogdan ever earned, which had been framed and hanging on the wall, and using it to buy a can of soda from the vending machine. That is not a business decision. That is revenge. That is a man who feels entitled to punish anyone who ever made him feel small. The sixth trait is exploiting other people to achieve your own goals. Walter's entire relationship with Jesse Pinkman is built on this. Jesse is useful to him. Jesse knows the drug world. Jesse does the dirty work. Jesse is emotionally vulnerable and easy to control. And Walter takes full advantage of all of it. He manipulates Jesse's emotions, his loyalty, and his desperate need for a father figure to keep Jesse exactly where he wants him. When Jesse becomes inconvenient or starts thinking for himself, Walter finds new ways to pull him back in line. Jesse is not a partner to Walter. Jesse is a tool. The seventh trait is a lack of empathy, meaning the inability or unwillingness to recognize what other people are feeling. The clearest example of this happens in Season 2, Episode 12, Phoenix. Jesse's girlfriend, Jane Margolis, is a recovering addict who has relapsed into heroin use. One night, Walter goes to Jesse's apartment and finds them both passed out after using. While Walter is there, Jane rolls onto her back and begins to choke on her own vomit. Walter sees it happening. He is standing right there. He could save her with a simple push, just rolling her onto her side. But he does not. He watches her die. He watches the life leave her body and does nothing to stop it. And his reasons are entirely self-serving. Jane was a threat to his control over Jesse. She was trying to blackmail him for money. She was pulling Jesse away from the business. So Walter let her die. And then he went home and continued his life as if nothing happened. The eighth trait is being envious of others, or believing that others are envious of you. Walter's entire relationship with Elliot and Gretchen Schwartz is rooted in envy. He watches their success from a distance and burns with jealousy over what he believes should have been his. And on the other end, Walter genuinely seems to believe that people like Gus Fring and the other players in the drug world should be in awe of his talent. When they are not, when they treat him as just another employee or asset rather than a genius to be worshipped, he becomes hostile and dangerous. The ninth and final trait is showing arrogant or superior behavior. By the middle of the series, Walter's arrogance is impossible to miss. The "I am the danger" speech in Season 4, Episode 6, Cornered, is perhaps the most famous example. Skylar tells Walter that she is scared for the family's safety. She suggests that Walter is in danger from the people he works with. And Walter's response is not reassurance. It is not comfort. It is a declaration of dominance. He tells Skylar that he is not in danger. He is the danger. He tells her that a guy opens his door and gets shot, and she thinks that of him. No, he is the one who knocks. This is a man who has completely lost the ability to see himself clearly. He is not just arrogant. He is delusional in his arrogance. He genuinely believes he is untouchable, unbeatable, and beyond the reach of consequence. When you stack all 9 of these traits together and lay them across the 5 seasons of Breaking Bad, the picture is overwhelming. Walter White does not just show a few signs here and there. He displays every single trait consistently and with increasing intensity as the series goes on. In the early seasons, the traits are buried under layers of insecurity and fear. But as Heisenberg grows stronger and Walter's old identity fades, the traits come roaring to the surface. By Season 5, they are running the show entirely. Walter is no longer a man with some problematic tendencies. He is a man whose entire personality is organized around the belief that he is superior, that he deserves more than everyone else, and that anyone who fails to recognize that is either an obstacle to be removed or a tool to be used. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the most dangerous part of all of this is not the arrogance or the entitlement or even the lack of empathy. The most dangerous part is how Walter uses these traits in combination. Because Walter White is not just self-absorbed. He is strategically self-absorbed. He does not just believe he is better than everyone. He uses that belief to justify manipulating, deceiving, and destroying the people around him. And nobody in his life suffers more from that manipulation than the person who trusted him the most, stood by him the longest, and paid the highest price for believing in him. Section 7. The Master Manipulator. How Walt controlled everyone around him. At the end of Section 6, we said that the most dangerous thing about Walter White is not just that he believes he is better than everyone else. It is that he uses that belief as fuel to manipulate, deceive, and control the people closest to him. And that is what this section is about. Because Walter White does not rule his world through brute force. He is not a physically imposing man. He does not carry a gun everywhere he goes. He does not have an army of soldiers at his command for most of the series. What Walter has is something far more effective than any of those things. He has the ability to get inside people's heads, figure out exactly what they need to hear, and then say it with such conviction that they believe him completely. Walter White is, above all else, a master manipulator. And nobody in the entire series demonstrates this more clearly than the way he treats Jesse Pinkman. Jesse Pinkman is the person Walter manipulates more than anyone else in Breaking Bad. And the reason is simple. Jesse is vulnerable. He comes from a family that gave up on him. His parents kicked him out of the house. He has no real direction in life. He struggles with addiction. He is desperate for approval, especially from older male figures who might fill the role that his own father never did. And Walter recognizes all of this almost immediately. He sees in Jesse a person who wants nothing more than to be told that he matters, that he is good enough, that someone believes in him. And Walter uses that need like a weapon. From the very first episode, Walter establishes himself as the authority figure in their relationship. Jesse was his student. Walter was his teacher. And that power balance never truly changes across the entire series. Even as they become business partners, even as Jesse grows and develops his own skills and instincts, Walter always treats him like a student who needs guidance. He talks down to Jesse. He belittles his intelligence. He makes Jesse feel small and incapable, so that Jesse will always come back to him for validation. And then, at carefully chosen moments, Walter will flip the script and show Jesse warmth. He will say something encouraging or protective, just enough to keep Jesse loyal. Just enough to make Jesse believe that underneath all the harshness, Walter actually cares about him. It is a cycle of breaking someone down and then building them back up just enough to keep them dependent on you. And Walter does it over and over again across all 5 seasons. One of the earliest and most devastating examples of Walter's manipulation of Jesse happens in Season 2, Episode 12, Phoenix. Jesse has been dating a young woman named Jane Margolis. Jane is smart, artistic, and protective of Jesse. She is also a recovering addict who has relapsed into heroin use since getting involved with Jesse. When Jane discovers how much money Jesse and Walter have made from their meth operation, she sees an opportunity. She calls Walter directly and threatens to expose him unless he gives Jesse his share of the money. Walter is furious, not because of the threat itself, but because Jane represents something he cannot control. She is pulling Jesse away from him. She is giving Jesse confidence and independence. She is making Jesse think he does not need Walter anymore. And for a man like Walter, losing control over Jesse is unacceptable. Later that night, Walter goes to Jesse's apartment. He finds Jesse and Jane both passed out in bed after using heroin. While Walter is standing there, Jane shifts in her sleep and rolls onto her back. She begins to vomit. She starts choking. Walter watches it happen. He actually reaches out instinctively at first, as if to help her. But then he stops. He pulls his hands back, and he stands there, watching Jane Margolis choke to death on her own vomit. And he lets it happen. He does nothing. He could have saved her life by simply pushing her onto her side. But he makes the conscious choice to let her die. Because with Jane gone, Jesse has nobody else. With Jane gone, Jesse comes back to Walter. With Jane gone, Walter is in control again. It is one of the coldest, most calculated decisions in the entire series, and it is made not out of hatred, but out of a need to maintain power over another person. And the manipulation does not stop there. It escalates. In Season 4, the conflict between Walter and Gus Fring reaches its peak. Gus has been working to turn Jesse against Walter by giving Jesse something Walter never gave him: respect. Gus assigns Jesse important tasks. He promotes Jesse within the operation. He treats Jesse like a professional, not a student. And it works. Jesse starts to pull away from Walter. He stops answering Walter's calls. He starts trusting Gus more than he trusts his own partner. And Walter, watching his grip on Jesse slip away, decides to do something truly monstrous. He poisons a child. The child's name is Brock Cantillo. He is the young son of Jesse's girlfriend, Andrea. Walter uses a poisonous plant called Lily of the Valley to make Brock severely ill. Not enough to kill him, but enough to put him in the hospital. And then Walter goes to Jesse and convinces him that Gus Fring was the one who poisoned Brock. Walter's argument is brilliant in its cruelty. He tells Jesse that Gus poisoned Brock to turn Jesse against Walter, to manipulate Jesse into killing his own partner. The irony, of course, is that this is exactly what Walter himself is doing. He is using the poisoning of a child to manipulate Jesse into turning against Gus. And it works. Jesse believes him completely. Jesse's rage shifts from Walter to Gus, and Jesse agrees to help Walter take Gus down. The poisoning of Brock is not revealed to be Walter's doing until the very end of Season 4, in the final shot of the finale, Face Off, when the camera pans to the lily-of-the-valley plant sitting in Walter's backyard. A man who poisons children to win a power struggle is not a man who is doing anything for his family. That is a man who will do absolutely anything to stay in control. But Jesse is not the only person Walter manipulates throughout the series. He is just the most frequent target. Walter manipulates his wife Skylar with a precision that is almost surgical. He lies to her constantly, and his lies are not sloppy or panicked. They are carefully constructed stories built on pieces of truth, which makes them almost impossible to disprove. When Skylar grows suspicious of his behavior, Walter responds with emotion rather than logic. He acts hurt. He acts confused. He acts like a man who cannot believe his own wife would question him. He makes Skylar feel guilty for doubting him, which causes her to back off and doubt her own instincts instead of his honesty. When a lie is about to be discovered, Walter confesses to something smaller and less damaging to cover the bigger secret. For example, when Skylar catches him in a lie about the second cell phone he has been using for drug business, Walter tells her a made-up story instead of the truth. He controls the flow of information so carefully that Skylar is always one step behind the reality of what is actually happening. Walter's manipulation of Hank is equally cold. In Season 5, Episode 11, Confessions, after Hank has discovered that Walter is Heisenberg, Walter creates a fake confession video. In the video, Walter does not confess to his own crimes. Instead, he tells a completely fabricated story in which Hank is the real drug kingpin. He says that Hank forced him to cook meth using his chemistry expertise. He says that Hank used him as his personal chemist and abused him and his family. And to make the lie even more devastating, Walter points out a real fact that makes the whole story seem believable. Hank's medical bills for his physical therapy after being shot were paid for by Walter using drug money. This is true. Walter did pay those bills. And that single, real detail, buried inside a mountain of lies, makes the entire fake confession feel dangerously convincing. If Walter releases that video, Hank's career is over. His reputation is destroyed. And Walter knows it. The video is not a confession. It is a weapon. It is blackmail disguised as honesty. Walter also manipulates Jesse into killing Gail Bedecker in the Season 3 finale, Full Measure. Walter and Jesse are working for Gus Fring at this point, and Gus has decided that Walter is too dangerous to keep alive. Gus plans to kill Walter and replace him with Gail, who has been learning Walter's formula. Walter knows that as long as Gail is alive, Gus does not need him. So the only way for Walter to survive is to make sure Gail cannot cook the formula. And the only way to do that is to kill him. But Walter cannot do it himself. He is being held at gunpoint by Mike Ehrmantraut. So he calls Jesse. He begs Jesse to go to Gail's apartment and kill him. Jesse does not want to. Jesse is not a killer, but Walter pleads with him. He tells Jesse that if Jesse does not kill Gail, both of them will die. And Jesse, terrified and shaking, goes to Gail's apartment, puts a gun to his face, and pulls the trigger. Jesse is devastated by this act. It haunts him for the rest of the series. But Walter survives, and that is all that matters to Walter. The way Walter manipulates Mike Ehrmantraut is more subtle, but just as revealing. Mike despises Walter. He sees through the act. He knows exactly what kind of man Walter is. And Mike tells him so, repeatedly and bluntly. But Walter cannot handle being spoken to that way. In Season 5, Episode 7, Say My Name, Walter and Mike have a final confrontation. Mike insults Walter, calling him out for destroying Gus Fring's carefully built operation out of pure ego. Mike tells Walter that if he had just known his place and been content with his position, none of the chaos would have happened. Mike's words are harsh, but they are true. And Walter cannot stand it. He shoots Mike. Not because Mike is a threat, Not because Mike has information that could hurt him. At least, not information Walter could not get elsewhere. He kills Mike because Mike hurt his feelings. Mike refused to show Walter the admiration and respect he believes he deserves, and Walter responded with a bullet. After shooting him, Walter sits next to Mike as he dies by a river and starts to apologize. He tells Mike he could have gotten the names of Mike's men from Lydia. He realizes, in that moment, that the killing was completely unnecessary. But by then it is too late. Mike dies staring at the water, and Walter is left sitting beside the body of a man he killed for no reason other than wounded pride. That is the pattern of Walter White's manipulation in its purest form. He does not manipulate people out of necessity, at least not always. He manipulates people because it feeds the part of him that needs to be in control. Every lie he tells Skylar, every emotional trick he plays on Jesse, every power move he makes against Hank or Mike or Saul, all of it comes from the same place. The same place that made him walk away from gray matter. The same place that made him refuse Elliot's money. The same place that made him stand in the desert and demand that a room full of armed men say his name. Walter White manipulates people because it makes him feel powerful. And feeling powerful is the only thing that makes him feel alive. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But there is a deeper question underneath all of this manipulation. A question about why Walter needs to feel powerful in the first place. Why does a man with a loving family, a stable job, and a roof over his head need so desperately to dominate every person and every situation around him? The answer goes back further than the meth, further than the cancer, further than gray matter. It goes back to something woven into the very core of who Walter White is as a man, and what the world told him a man is supposed to be. Section 8. Toxic Masculinity and the Provider Complex. Walt's War with Himself. At the end of Section 7, we asked a question. Why does Walter White need to feel powerful so badly? Why does a man who has a family, a home, and a steady income feel so empty inside that he has to manipulate, deceive, and dominate every person around him just to feel like he matters? The answer to that question is not just about Walter as an individual. It is about something much bigger. It is about what Walter was taught a man is supposed to be, what a man is supposed to provide, what a man is supposed to look like in the eyes of his family and the world. Because when you strip away the meth and the money and the murders, what you find at the center of Walter White's entire journey is a man who is at war with his own idea of what it means to be a man. And that war started long before the first episode of Breaking Bad ever aired. Go back to the pilot. Look at where Walter stands in his own life. He works 2 jobs and still cannot comfortably support his family on a single income. His wife handles the household finances. His brother-in-law Hank is the one everyone looks up to at family gatherings. His own son seems more impressed by Hank than by him. Walter is the man of the house, but he does not feel like one. He feels small. He feels weak. He feels like the least impressive man in his own family. And the show makes sure the audience sees this from the very first scenes. At Walter's 50th birthday party, Hank shows up and immediately takes over the room. He pulls out his DEA handgun and starts showing it off to the men at the party, including Walt Jr. When Walter holds the gun and comments on its weight, Hank laughs and says, "That's why they hire men." It is a throwaway comment to Hank, a joke, but to Walter, it is a reminder of everything he is not. Strong, commanding, respected, masculine. The show goes even further in the pilot to show Walter's lack of traditional masculine presence. On the night of his birthday, Skylar gives him a moment of physical affection that is completely devoid of any passion or connection. She is not even paying attention to him. She is watching her laptop screen while it happens. Walter does not protest. He does not say anything. He just accepts it. And that acceptance is the point. Walter has been accepting less than he wants, less than he believes he deserves, for so long that he does not even know how to push back anymore. He has been trained by years of quiet humiliation to simply take whatever is given to him and be grateful for it. But here is what the cancer changes. When Walter enters the drug trade, the dynamic shifts almost immediately. The show gives us a very specific scene that illustrates this perfectly. After one of his earliest cooks in the RV, after a violent confrontation that results in death, Walter comes home to Skylar. And instead of being the quiet, passive man she is used to, Walter approaches her with an aggressive, almost forceful energy that is completely new. There is a hunger in him that was not there before, a confidence, a physicality. Skylar is surprised, even confused. But Walter is not confused at all. For the first time in years, he feels like a man. Not because he cooked meth, not because someone died, but because he did something dangerous, something powerful, something that required courage and intelligence and nerve. And that feeling, that rush of masculine validation, is something Walter has been starving for. This is what drives Walter's most irrational decisions throughout the series. Not greed, not survival. Masculine pride. When Elliot Schwartz offers to pay for Walter's cancer treatment in Season 1, Episode 5, Walter does not just refuse the offer, he treats it like an attack on his manhood. In his mind, accepting money from Elliot would mean admitting that he cannot take care of his own family. It would mean admitting that he is not enough. It would mean standing in front of his wife and his son and saying, "I cannot do this on my own." And for Walter White, that admission is worse than cooking methamphetamine. It is worse than breaking the law. It is worse than risking his freedom and his life. Because in Walter's mind, a man who cannot provide for his family through his own work is not really a man at all. You see this belief surface again and again throughout the series. In Season 2, Episode 12, Phoenix, Walter pulls aside a piece of drywall in his house and shows baby Holly the stacks of cash he has hidden behind it. He whispers to her. He tells her that Daddy did that. Daddy earned that money. There is pride in his voice, but there is also something desperate about it. He is not just showing Holly the money. He is proving something to himself. He is proving that he is a provider, that he can take care of his family, that he is not the powerless, overlooked man the world sees when they look at him. Later, in Season 3, Episode 3, IFT, Walter tells Skylar something that cuts right to the heart of his entire worldview. He tells her that the money he earned does not belong to anyone else. He tells her he did not steal it, he earned it. The emphasis on the word earned is everything. Walter needs Skylar to understand that this money is the product of his own work, his own intelligence, his own hands. It is not a handout. It is not charity. It is not a gift from Elliot Schwartz. It is his. And by extension, it proves that he is the provider. He is the man of the house. He is doing what a man is supposed to do. The car wash purchase in Season 4 is another example of masculine pride driving Walter's decisions. When Walter buys the A1A car wash from Bogdan, the surface reason is money laundering. He needs a legitimate business to clean his drug money through. But the real reason, the emotional reason, is revenge. Bogdan is the man who humiliated Walter for years. He forced Walter to wash cars outside. He bossed him around. He made Walter feel small and powerless in front of customers and students. Buying the car wash is Walter's way of saying, "I am above you now. I own you." And the detail about Walter taking Bogdan's first dollar off the wall and using it to buy a soda from the vending machine is not a smart business move. It is a power move. It is Walter asserting dominance over a man who once made him feel like less than a man. Even the "I am the danger" speech in Season 4, Episode 6, Cornered, is rooted in this same need to assert masculine power. Skylar tells Walter that she is scared. She is worried that the people Walter works with might come after the family. She is trying to protect her children. And Walter's response is not to comfort her or reassure her. His response is to declare himself the most dangerous person in the equation. He tells Skylar that she clearly does not know who she is talking to. He tells her he is not in danger. He is the danger. He tells her that he is the one who knocks. This speech is not about protecting his family. It is about Walter refusing to be seen as a victim, refusing to be seen as weak, refusing to be the man who needs protecting instead of the man who does the protecting. In Walter's mind, the moment Skylar sees him as vulnerable, he stops being a man. And he would rather terrify his own wife than let that happen. The tragedy of all of this is that Walter's idea of what a man should be is the very thing that destroys his family. He cooks meth to provide for them, but the meth puts them in danger. He refuses help to prove his independence, but that refusal drives him deeper into crime. He dominates Skylar to feel powerful, but that domination drives her away. He controls Jesse to maintain authority, but that control turns Jesse into an enemy. Every single thing Walter does in the name of being a man ends up taking away the things that actually mattered. His wife, his children, his home, his brother-in-law, his freedom. All of it, gone. Sacrificed on the altar of a version of manhood that was never worth the cost. Walter White did not just break bad because of cancer or resentment or wounded pride. He broke bad because he believed that being a real man meant never asking for help, never showing weakness, and never letting anyone else stand taller than him. And that belief, more than any drug or any diagnosis, is what ultimately killed him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Walter's war with masculinity and pride is only one layer of his psychology. Underneath the manipulation, underneath the ego, underneath the need to dominate, there is an even deeper question about who Walter White truly is. A question about whether the man we met in the pilot episode was the real Walter White, or whether that man was always a mask hiding something much darker. A question that goes all the way back to one of the oldest ideas in psychology, an idea about the monster that lives inside every human being, hiding in the shadows, waiting for permission to come out. Section 9. The Jungian Shadow. Was Heisenberg always inside Walter White? At the end of Section 8, we raised a question that sits at the very heart of Breaking Bad. Was the Walter White we met in the pilot episode the real Walter White? Was the quiet, passive, agreeable chemistry teacher the genuine article? Or was that man always a performance, a mask worn by someone much darker who was just waiting for the right moment to stop pretending? This is the question that fans, critics, and psychologists have been debating ever since the show ended. And it is a question that connects directly to one of the oldest and most powerful ideas in the history of psychology. The idea that every human being, no matter how kind or gentle or decent they appear on the surface, has a dark side hidden underneath. A side they do not show the world. A side they might not even show themselves. A side that sits in the shadows of their mind, quietly waiting. This idea comes from a Swiss psychiatrist named Carl Jung, who lived in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and is considered one of the most important figures in the history of understanding the human mind. Jung believed that every person has what he called a shadow. The shadow is not a separate person living inside you. It is a part of your own personality that you have pushed down, hidden away, or refused to acknowledge. It is made up of the desires, impulses, and emotions that you have been taught are wrong or unacceptable. The anger you swallowed instead of expressing. The ambition you buried because people told you to be humble. the selfishness you disguised as sacrifice, the cruelty you felt but never acted on. All of those things do not just disappear because you choose not to look at them. They collect in the shadow. They build up over time, and if they are never dealt with honestly, they can eventually take over. Now think about Walter White through that lens. Think about everything we have discussed across the previous 8 sections. A man who gave up his share of a billion-dollar company because his ego could not handle feeling inferior. A man who spent 20 years blaming other people for a decision he made himself. A man who felt humiliated at his job, overlooked by his family, and overshadowed by his brother-in-law. A man who knew he was brilliant, but had nothing in his life to show for it. A man who swallowed his anger every single day, smiled through the frustration, and told himself he was fine when he was anything but fine. All of that anger, all of that resentment, all of that wounded pride, it did not go anywhere. It went into the shadow. It sat there in the dark corners of Walter White's mind, growing heavier and more powerful with every passing year. And then the cancer came. And the cancer did not create a new darkness inside Walter. The cancer opened the door to the darkness that was already there. It gave the shadow permission to step into the light. Because when you were told you were going to die, the rules changed. The social pressure to be polite, to be humble, to be agreeable, all of that pressure suddenly means nothing. The fear of consequences that kept the shadow locked away disappears when the biggest consequence of all, death, is already on its way. And what comes out when those barriers fall is not something new. It is something old. Something that has been building since the day Walter White walked away from gray matter and spent the next 2 decades pretending he was okay with the life he settled for. The evidence for this is all over the series. Look at how quickly Walter adapts to the criminal world. A man who had never broken a serious law in his life suddenly starts lying to his wife with expert precision from nearly the first episode. He walks into Tuco Salamanca's office and blows up the room with fulminated mercury, like he has been doing it his whole life. He starts making life and death decisions with a speed and confidence that does not match someone who is completely new to this world. If Walter White were truly just a mild-mannered teacher who was forced into crime by desperate circumstances, you would expect him to be terrible at it. You would expect him to fall apart, to make constant mistakes, to be overwhelmed by the pressure. But he is not overwhelmed. He thrives. He takes to the criminal world like a fish to water, and that ease is the strongest piece of evidence that the darkness was always there. Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, described the premise of the show as turning Mr. Chips into Scarface. Mr. Chips is a fictional character, a kind and beloved schoolteacher. Scarface is Tony Montana, the ruthless drug lord from the 1983 movie. The idea was to take a good man and turn him into a monster over the course of the series. But what the show actually reveals is something more complicated than a simple transformation. Because the more you watch, the more you realize that Walter White was never truly Mr. Chips. He was playing Mr. Chips, the real Walter, the one with the ambition and the pride and the need for power, was always underneath. Heisenberg was not born in Tuco's office, or in Jesse's basement, or in the desert. Heisenberg was born decades earlier, in the moment Walter walked away from gray matter and started telling himself a story about being a victim, instead of admitting that he was a man who sabotaged his own future. Bryan Cranston, the actor who brought Walter White to life, said something that supports this reading of the character. He said that, given the right set of circumstances, anyone could become a completely different person. But the key word in that statement is not different. The key word is become. Because you cannot become something that has no foundation inside you. You cannot transform into a ruthless, calculating, power-hungry criminal if there is nothing inside you that resonates with ruthlessness, calculation, and power. The cancer did not plant a seed in Walter White. The seed was already there. The cancer just gave it sunlight. There is a moment in the series that captures this idea perfectly. In Season 4, Episode 6, Cornered, Walter delivers the famous "I am the danger" speech to Skylar. But what makes this scene so revealing is not the words themselves. It is the look on Walter's face as he says them. There is no hesitation, no doubt, no performance. When Walter tells Skylar that he is the one who knocks, he means it with every part of his being. This is not a man putting on an act to scare his wife. This is a man telling the truth for what might be the first time in his life. The danger is not something he is pretending to be. The danger is who he is. And the 20 years he spent as a quiet, humble teacher were the pretense all along. The debate between transformation and revelation is one that will probably never be fully settled. There are people who believe Walter was a good man who was corrupted by terrible circumstances. And there are people who believe Walter was always capable of everything he did, and the circumstances just gave him the excuse to do it. But the beauty of Breaking Bad is that both things can be true at the same time. Walter White is not one thing or the other. He is both. The gentle father who reads to his daughter and the ruthless criminal who poisons children exist inside the same man. They are not separate people fighting for control. They are two sides of the same coin. And the series is the story of one side slowly swallowing the other. Jung himself had a famous quote that applies perfectly to Walter White. He said, "That which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate." In other words, the parts of yourself that you refuse to face honestly will eventually control you without you even realizing it. Walter White spent 20 years refusing to face his anger, his ambition, his resentment, and his hunger for power. He pushed all of it into the shadow and pretended it was not there. And because he never dealt with it, because he never brought it into the light and examined it honestly, it came out in the worst possible way. It came out as Heisenberg. It came out as a drug empire. It came out as manipulation and murder and the complete destruction of everyone he claimed to love. Walter White did not lose a battle with his shadow. He surrendered to it. He stopped fighting against the darkness inside himself and instead let it run the show. And the result was not freedom or fulfillment or peace. The result was a trail of bodies, broken relationships, and a man dying alone on the floor of a meth lab. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the shadow and the ego and the wounded masculinity are only parts of the full picture. Because psychologists who have studied Walter White have not just looked at one or two traits. They have looked at the complete pattern. And when you combine everything we have discussed so far, the narcissism, the manipulation, the need for control, and the shadow that was always lurking underneath, you get something with a very specific name. A combination of 3 dark personality traits that, when found together in one person, create something truly dangerous. And Walter White does not just show signs of one or two of them. He shows all 3. Section 10. The Dark Triad. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and Psychopathy in Walt. At the end of Section 9, we talked about how the different parts of Walter White's personality, when combined together, form something much more dangerous than any single trait on its own. We have already covered his narcissism, his manipulation, his wounded pride, and his shadow self in great detail across the previous sections. But there is a framework that pulls all of these pieces together into one complete picture. It comes from the work of psychologists who study the darkest corners of human personality. And when Dr.
Todd Grande, a licensed professional counselor, applied this framework to Walter White, what he found was that Walter does not just display one troubling personality trait. He displays 3. And those 3 traits, when they show up together in the same person, form what psychologists call
the dark triad. It is the combination of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. And Walter White, across all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad, shows clear and consistent signs of all 3. We covered narcissism in detail in Section 6, so we do not need to repeat the full breakdown here. But as a reminder, Walter's narcissism shows up in his grand sense of self-importance, his need for admiration, his belief that he is special and unique, and his lack of genuine concern for how his actions affect the people around him. The Say My Name scene in Season 5, Episode 7 is the clearest single example. Walter stands in the middle of a desert, surrounded by armed men, and forces a rival drug distributor named Declan to say his name, not because it serves any business purpose, because Walter needs to hear it. He needs someone to look at him and acknowledge who he is. That need for recognition, that hunger to be worshipped for his brilliance, is narcissism in its purest form. And it drives nearly every major decision Walter makes, from the middle of the series onward. The second trait in the dark triad is Machiavellianism. This word comes from a man named Niccolo Machiavelli, who lived hundreds of years ago and wrote about how powerful people gain and keep their power. The basic idea behind Machiavellianism is simple. It is the willingness to manipulate, deceive, and use other people as tools to get what you want. A person with this trait does not care about fairness or honesty. They care about winning. They care about control. And they are willing to play the long game, setting up moves and traps far in advance to make sure they always come out on top. Walter White is a textbook example of this. We already talked about how Walter manipulates Jesse, Skyler, and Hank in Section 7. But his Machiavellianism goes beyond individual relationships. It shows up in the way he plans and executes entire operations with cold, calculated precision. The single best example of this is the prison killings in Season 5, Episode 8, Gliding Over All. After Mike Ehrmantraut's death, Walter has a problem. Mike had 10 associates in prison who were being paid to keep quiet about Gus Fring's former drug operation. With Mike gone, those payments stop. And if those 10 men stop getting paid, they might start talking to the police, which could lead directly back to Walter. So Walter decides to kill all 10 of them. Not 1, not 2, all 10. And he does not just order the hits randomly. He plans it with the kind of detail and timing that would impress a military commander. Working with Jack Welker's neo-Nazi gang, Walter orchestrates simultaneous attacks across 3 different prisons, all carried out within a 2-minute window. 10 men are killed in 10 different locations almost at the same time. And none of the prison guards or authorities can stop it, because it all happens so fast. Walter watches the clock during the operation with complete calm. There is no panic on his face, no hesitation, no second guessing. He looks like a man who is doing nothing more stressful than waiting for a pot of coffee to finish brewing. That level of cold, detached planning is Machiavellianism at its most extreme. Another example of Walter's Machiavellianism is the way he engineers the death of Gus Fring. Throughout Season 4, Walter is trapped in a deadly power struggle with Gus. He cannot kill Gus directly because Gus is too careful, too protected, and too smart. So Walter finds an indirect route. He discovers that Gus has a personal enemy, an elderly former cartel member named Hector Salamanca, who is confined to a wheelchair and can only communicate by ringing a bell. Hector despises Gus because Gus killed members of his family. Walter visits Hector and convinces him to cooperate in a plan to kill Gus. Walter builds a pipe bomb and attaches it to Hector's wheelchair. When Gus comes to visit Hector at the nursing home, as Walter knows he eventually will because of their personal history, Hector rings his bell to trigger the bomb. The explosion kills both Hector and Gus. Walter does not pull the trigger himself. He does not even need to be in the building. He simply sets the pieces in motion, like a chess player sacrificing one piece to capture a more valuable one, and lets the board play out. That is Machiavellianism. Not brute force. Strategy, patience, and the willingness to use other people, even a dying old man in a wheelchair, as instruments to achieve your goal. The third trait in the dark triad is psychopathy. Now, this does not mean Walter is a serial killer who enjoys hurting people for fun. Psychopathy, in the way psychologists use the word, refers to a pattern of impulsive behavior, sensation-seeking, a shallow emotional life, and a reduced ability to feel guilt or remorse over time. And while Walter does show genuine emotion early in the series, particularly after killing Crazy 8, those emotions fade as the show progresses. By the later seasons, Walter is doing things that would horrify the man he was in Season 1, and he barely flinches. Dr. Grande's analysis highlights Walter's increasing impulsiveness as a key sign of this trait. One of the most striking examples happens in Season 5, Episode 4, 51. Skylar has demanded that Walter return their son's brand new Dodge Challenger to the dealership. She is trying to prevent suspicion about where the money came from. Walter agrees to take the car back. But instead of driving it to the dealership, he takes it to an empty parking lot and does donuts, spinning the car in circles until the tires smoke. And then, instead of returning it, he parks the car in the lot and sets it on fire. He blows up a brand new car. Not because it serves any purpose, not because it protects his operation, because he feels like it. Because the thrill of destruction is more satisfying to him in that moment than the rational choice would be. That is sensation-seeking. That is impulsive. That is psychopathic behavior in its textbook form. And then there is the killing of Mike Ehrmantraut in Season 5, Episode 7, Say My Name. Mike is leaving town. He is done with Walter. He is done with the meth business. All he wants are the names of his 10 associates in prison, so he can make sure they continue to be paid and stay quiet. He tells Walter to get the names from Lydia. And then Mike makes the mistake of telling Walter the truth. He tells Walter that all of this chaos, all of this destruction, is Walter's fault. He tells Walter that if he had just known his place and let Gus run the operation in peace, none of this would have happened. Mike's words are blunt and angry, but they are accurate. And Walter cannot handle it. He grabs a gun from Mike's go bag and shoots Mike in the stomach. Mike stumbles to his car, drives to a nearby river, and collapses on the bank. Walter follows him, and as Mike sits there dying, Walter starts to apologize. He tells Mike that he just realized he could have gotten the names from Lydia all along. The killing was pointless. It served no strategic purpose. Walter killed Mike because Mike insulted him. Because Mike refused to treat him with the respect and admiration that Walter believes he deserves. A man who murders someone over hurt feelings and then immediately realizes it was unnecessary is a man whose impulse control has completely collapsed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. When you put all three of these traits together, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, what you get is not just a bad person. What you get is a person who believes they are better than everyone else, who is willing to manipulate and deceive anyone to maintain their position, and who is capable of acting on violent impulses without the normal emotional barriers that would stop most people. Walter White does not just have one of these traits. He has all three. And as the series moves into its final stretch, those three traits combine to produce the most destructive phase of Walter's entire journey. A phase where everything he built, everything he fought for, everything he sacrificed his family and his soul to create, comes crashing down around him in the most devastating way possible. Section 11. The Collapse of the Empire. Psychology of Loss, Paranoia, and Isolation. At the end of Section 10, we talked about how the combination of Walter White's narcissism, his strategic manipulation, and his increasingly impulsive and violent behavior created a man who was more dangerous, than any single one of those traits could have produced on its own. But dangerous men are not untouchable men. And the same traits that allowed Walter to build his empire are the exact same traits that brought it crashing down. Because the thing about ego, pride, and the need for control is that they do not just drive you forward. They blind you. They make you believe you are smarter than everyone around you. They make you believe you can outrun consequences forever. And Walter White, for all his brilliance, for all his careful planning and calculated moves, made the one mistake that his ego would never let him see coming. He got comfortable. He got careless. And he left a piece of evidence sitting in the one place he should have known better than to leave it. The beginning of the end happens in Season 5, Episode 8, Gliding Over All. Walter has won. By every measure that matters to him, he has achieved what he set out to achieve. Gus Fring is dead. Mike is dead. The 10 prison witnesses are dead. Walter's meth operation is running smoothly, producing millions of dollars. He has more money than he could ever spend. So much that Skylar takes him to a storage unit where the cash is piled in a stack so large that she tells him she cannot even count it anymore. She asks Walter how much is enough. She asks him when this ends. And Walter, looking at the mountain of money he built, actually seems to consider the question. Shortly after this scene, Walter tells Skylar he is out. He is done. The empire is over. For a brief moment, it looks like Walter White might actually walk away. But then something happens. Something small. Something that should not have mattered at all. Hank Schrader goes to the bathroom. It is during a family barbecue at Walter and Skylar's house. Everything is calm. Everything is normal. And while sitting on the toilet, Hank reaches for something to read. He picks up a book that is sitting on the back of the toilet. It is a poetry collection by a man named Walt Whitman called Leaves of Grass. Hank opens the book and sees a handwritten inscription on the inside cover. It reads, "To my other favorite WW. It's an honor working with you. Fondly, GB." Those initials, GB, stand for Gail Bedecker, the man Jesse killed on Walter's orders back in Season 3, the man whose lab notes Hank had been reviewing months earlier as part of the Heisenberg investigation. And in those lab notes, Gail had written about someone he admired, someone with the initials WW. At the time, Hank had jokingly asked Walter if he was the WW in Gail's notes, and Walter laughed it off by quoting Walt Whitman. But now, sitting in Walter's own bathroom, holding a book gifted by Gail Bedecker to WW, the joke stops being funny. The look on Hank's face as the pieces fall into place is one of the most powerful moments in television history. And just like that, everything Walter built begins to collapse. The confrontation between Walter and Hank happens in Season 5, Episode 9, Blood Money. Hank has been sitting on the Discovery, barely able to function. He has panic attacks. He cannot go to work. The realization that his own brother-in-law, the man he has been having dinner with for years, the man married to his wife's sister, is the drug kingpin he has been chasing for over a year, has completely shattered his world. When Hank finally confronts Walter in his garage, the scene is raw and intense. Hank grabs Walter by the shirt and slams the garage door shut. He tells Walter that he does not know who he is. He tells Walter that he has been looking at the evidence. And Walter's response tells you everything about where his mind is at this point in the series. He does not beg. He does not confess. He does not try to explain. Instead, he threatens Hank. He looks his brother-in-law dead in the eyes and says that if Hank truly does not know who he is talking to, then maybe his best course would be to tread lightly. That is not the language of a man who is scared. That is the language of Heisenberg. The mask is no longer something Walter puts on when he needs to be tough. It is his face now. From this point forward, Walter's paranoia escalates rapidly. He buries his money in barrels in the desert, marking the location with a lottery ticket that contains the GPS coordinates. He creates the fake confession video in Season 5, Episode 11, Confessions, framing Hank as the mastermind behind the entire drug operation. He uses the fact that he paid for Hank's medical bills with drug money as leverage, knowing that this single detail makes Hank look complicit, even though he had no idea where the money came from. Every move Walter makes from this point is defensive, desperate, and driven by the fear of losing everything he gained. But the biggest blow comes from Jesse. After years of manipulation, Jesse has finally started to see Walter clearly. The breaking point is the realization that Walter poisoned Brock. When Jesse figures out that Walter used the Lily of the Valley plant to poison a child, his entire worldview shifts. The man he trusted, the man he called Mr. White, the man he allowed to be a father figure in his life, was the one who poisoned an innocent boy to win a power struggle. Jesse's loyalty, which Walter had exploited for years, turns to rage. And Jesse goes to the one person who wants to take Walter down as badly as he does. He goes to Hank. Jesse's betrayal sets off a chain of events that Walter cannot control. Working together, Hank and Jesse set a trap. They trick Walter into believing that Jesse has found his buried money and is about to destroy it. Walter panics. He races to the desert, screaming into his phone, accidentally confessing to multiple crimes as Jesse records the call. When Walter arrives at the burial site, he realizes it was a setup. Hank and his partner Stephen Gomez are there. Jesse is there. Walter is handcuffed and placed in the back of Hank's SUV. And for a moment, it looks like it is truly over. But then Jack Welker and his neo-Nazi gang arrive. What follows is the single most devastating episode in the entire series. Season 5, Episode 14, Ozymandias. The episode is named after a poem about a fallen king whose empire has crumbled to dust in the desert. And that is exactly what happens to Walter White. Jack's men engage in a shootout with Hank and Gomez. Gomez is killed. Hank is wounded, but alive. Walter begs Jack to spare Hank's life. He offers Jack all of his money, all $80 million buried in the ground right there. He is screaming, pleading, desperate. But Jack does not care about the money. He shoots Hank in the head while Walter watches. Walter collapses to the ground, screaming. The pain on his face is real. Whatever else Walter has become, whatever darkness has taken over, Hank was still family. And watching him die breaks something inside Walter that can never be repaired. Jack's men take most of Walter's money, leaving him with a single barrel. They take Jesse prisoner, forcing him into slavery to cook meth for them. And Walter, left in the desert with nothing but one barrel of cash and a destroyed soul, rolls it through the sand alone. He buys an old truck from a Native American man and drives home. But home is no longer safe either. Skylar knows everything. She knows about Hank. She knows it is over. And when Walter tries to convince the family to pack up and run, Skylar pulls a kitchen knife on him. She tells him to get out. Walt Jr., the one person who still saw Walter as a good man, calls the police on his own father. Walter grabs baby Holly and runs. He later returns Holly to a fire station and makes a phone call to Skylar that is being recorded by the police. During the call, he says terrible things to her. Cruel things that sound like the words of an abusive monster. But the way Bryan Cranston plays the scene, with tears running down his face as he speaks, tells you that Walter is doing this on purpose. He is saying these horrible things to make Skylar look like a victim, not an accomplice. It is one last manipulation, but this time it is done to protect her rather than control her. Walter flees to a cabin in New Hampshire, arranged by a man who specializes in making people disappear. And it is here, alone in a wooden cabin in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but a barrel of cash and his cancer eating him alive, that the full weight of what Walter White has done finally catches up with him. His family is gone. His money is useless. His brother-in-law is dead because of him. His partner is enslaved because of him. His son hates him. His wife is terrified of him. His empire, the thing he sacrificed everything to build, exists only in the hands of neo-Nazis who are forcing Jesse to cook his formula in chains. Walter White wanted to be remembered. He wanted to leave a legacy. He wanted the world to know his name. And the world does know his name, but not the way he wanted. His name is on wanted posters and news broadcasts. His name is spoken with disgust by the people he loved most. The empire he built is dust, and the king who built it is sitting alone in a cabin, dying, with nothing left but the consequences of his own choices. This is what unchecked ego produces. This is where narcissism and manipulation and pride lead when they are allowed to run without any brakes. Not to glory, not to power, not to respect. To a man sitting in a room by himself, watching his own life burn from a distance, unable to reach any of the people he destroyed along the way. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the story of Walter White does not end in that cabin. Because even after losing everything, even after watching his entire world collapse, there is one more thing Walter White has left to give. One more moment that will redefine everything the audience thought they knew about him. One final confession that strips away every lie, every excuse, and every justification he ever made, and reveals, at last, the raw and honest truth about why he did what he did. Section 12. I did it for me. The final confession and the psychology of self-awareness. At the end of Section 11, we left Walter White in the worst place a human being can be. Not dead, not in prison, something worse. Alone, sitting in a cabin in New Hampshire with a barrel of money that cannot buy back a single thing he has lost. His wife pulled a knife on him. His son called the police on him. His brother-in-law was shot in the head because of his choices. His partner is being held in chains by neo-Nazis, forced to cook the formula that Walter created. Every single relationship in Walter White's life has been destroyed. Every single person he claimed to love has been damaged beyond repair. And the empire he sacrificed all of them to build does not even belong to him anymore. It belongs to Jack Welker and his gang, who stole his money and his recipe and left him with nothing but a barrel of cash and a death sentence. This is the end result of everything we have discussed across the previous 11 sections. The resentment from Section 1, the gray matter wound from Section 2, the cancer that unlocked his true self in Section 3, the Heisenberg mask from Section 4, the moral erosion from Section 5, the narcissism, the manipulation, the toxic pride, the shadow, the dark triad. All of it has led here, to a man sitting alone in a room waiting to die. But Walter White does not die in that cabin. Something happens that pulls him back. In Season 5, Episode 15, Granite State, Walter is watching television in a bar in New Hampshire. He has called the bar's payphone ahead of time and arranged for his son, Walt Jr., to be pulled out of class to take the call. Walter wants to send money to his family. He wants to mail a package of cash to a friend of Walt Jr.'s, hoping it will eventually reach his son. But when Walt Jr. gets on the phone, he does not want to hear it. He is furious. He is heartbroken. He tells his father that he wishes he would just die. The call ends, and Walter is shattered. He sits at the bar, defeated, ready to give up. He even calls the DEA to turn himself in. But while he is waiting for them to arrive, something on the television catches his eye. It is a Charlie Rose interview with Elliot and Gretchen Schwartz, his old partners from gray matter technologies.
During the interview, Charlie Rose asks Elliot and Gretchen about their connection to Walter White. They have recently made a $28 million donation to fund drug rehabilitation clinics, and Rose asks if this was done to make amends for their association with the infamous Heisenberg. Both Elliot and Gretchen are quick to distance themselves. Elliot says that Walter had virtually nothing to do with the creation of gray matter technologies. He says Walter's contribution to the company was essentially nothing. Gretchen agrees. She says the only thing Walter contributed was the name. She then says that the man she once knew, the sweet, kind Walter White, is gone. He has been replaced by someone else entirely. Walter watches this interview, and something shifts behind his eyes. The police arrive at the bar, but Walter is already gone. He left his drink sitting on the counter, the ice still melting. He is no longer a man who is ready to surrender. He is a man with a purpose, and that purpose drives every single thing he does in the series finale. Season 5, Episode 16, Felina. Now, there has been a lot of debate about what exactly pulled Walter back into action. Some people believe it was the gray matter interview that reignited his ego. That seeing Elliot and Gretchen dismiss his contributions to the company he helped build was the final insult his narcissism could not tolerate. And there is probably truth to that. But what Walter does with that renewed energy is not what you would expect from a man driven purely by ego. Because in Felina, Walter does not go on a rampage to reclaim his empire. He does not try to rebuild. He does not try to win. For the first time in the entire series, Walter White stops trying to control the outcome and instead focuses on doing the few things he has left to do before he dies. His first stop is Elliot and Gretchen's house. He breaks in and waits for them to come home. When they arrive, Walter is standing in their living room. They are terrified. But Walter does not hurt them. He has a box with him, and inside the box is the remainder of his drug money, roughly $9,700,000. He tells Elliot and Gretchen that they are going to use this money to set up a trust fund for his son, Walter Jr. They will present it as a donation from the Schwartz family, a generous gift from two old friends. Walt Jr. will never know the money came from his father. Walter tells Elliot and Gretchen that if they fail to follow through, they will be killed. He gestures toward the windows, where two red laser dots appear on Elliot and Gretchen's chests, as if snipers are aiming at them. Elliot and Gretchen agree immediately, shaking with fear. After Walter leaves, the camera reveals that the laser pointers are not attached to sniper rifles. They are being held by Badger and Skinny Pete, two of Jesse's old friends, who Walter hired to stand outside with $5 laser pointers from a store. It is one final con, one last manipulation. But this time, it is not for Walter's benefit. It is for his son. Walter's next stop is the most important one. He goes to see Skylar. She is living in a small, rundown apartment. The house is gone. The life they built together is gone. Skylar looks exhausted, broken, and hollow. She has been living under the weight of Walter's crimes, facing potential prosecution, cut off from her sister Marie, and raising two children alone. When Walter walks in, Skylar braces herself. She has heard his excuses before. She has heard him say it was all for the family more times than she can count. And she tells him, flatly, that if he has come to give her that speech one more time, she does not want to hear it. She tells him that if she has to hear one more time that he did this for the family, she will not be able to take it. And then Walter White does something he has not done in 62 episodes of television. He tells the truth. He looks at Skylar and says, "I did it for me." He tells her that he liked it. He tells her that he was good at it. And he tells her that he was really alive. That is the confession. That is the moment that changes everything. Not a dramatic courtroom speech. Not a shouted admission during a fight. A quiet, simple,
honest statement made by a dying man to the woman he destroyed. 5 seasons of lies. 5 seasons of justifications. 5 seasons of telling himself and everyone around him that he was doing it for the family. And it all comes down to 6 words. I did it for me. The power of this confession is enormous, because for the first time in the entire series, Walter is not performing. He is not manipulating. He is not trying to control how Skylar sees him. He is simply telling her the truth. And the truth is exactly what we have been building toward across all 12 sections of this essay. Walter White did not cook meth because he had cancer. He did not build a drug empire because his family needed money. He did not become Heisenberg because the world forced him into it. He did it because it made him feel alive. Because standing in that lab, producing a product that no one else on Earth could match, made him feel like the man he always believed he was supposed to be. The man who was too brilliant for a high school classroom. The man who was too talented to wash cars. The man who should have been running gray matter technologies instead of watching Elliot and Gretchen take credit for his work. Every lie Walter ever told was built on top of one foundational lie. The lie that he was doing it for his family. And in this moment, standing in Skylar's tiny apartment, he finally tears that lie down. After the confession, Walter leaves Skylar the lottery ticket that contains the GPS coordinates to the burial site of Hank Schrader and Stephen Gomez. He tells her to use those coordinates as a bargaining chip with the prosecutors. It is the one thing he can give her that might actually help. He then watches baby Holly sleeping in her crib one last time, and he watches Walt Jr. from a distance, standing outside in the cold, looking at his son through a window, knowing he will never speak to him again. The man who once showed Holly stacks of cash hidden behind a wall and whispered, "Daddy did that," is now looking at his children through glass, separated from them by everything he has done. Walter's final destination is the compound where Jack Welker and his neo-Nazi gang are holding Jesse prisoner. Walter has built a remote-controlled machine gun mechanism in the trunk of his car. When he arrives, Jack's men bring him inside. Jesse is there, chained, broken, scarred, and hollow from months of captivity and forced labor. Walter triggers the machine gun from his car keys, and the weapon tears through the building, killing most of Jack's crew. In the chaos, Walter tackles Jesse to the ground, shielding him with his own body. Todd Alquist, who has been Jesse's captor and tormentor, survives the initial attack. Jesse strangles Todd to death with his chains. Jack, wounded on the floor, tries to bargain with Walter by offering to tell him where the rest of his money is hidden. Walter shoots him mid-sentence. The money does not matter anymore. Walter picks up a gun and holds it out to Jesse. He tells Jesse to do it. He is giving Jesse permission to kill him, to take revenge for everything Walter has put him through. Jane, Brock, the years of manipulation, the slavery, all of it. Jesse looks at Walter and sees the wound in his side. Walter has been hit by one of his own bullets from the machine gun. He is already dying. Jesse drops the gun and says no. He tells Walter that if Walter wants to die, he should do it himself. Jesse is done being Walter White's instrument. He gets in a car and drives away from the compound, screaming and crying and laughing, finally free for the first time since the series began. Walter walks into the meth lab that Jack's crew has been using. It is his formula, his equipment, his creation, corrupted and run by strangers. He walks through the lab slowly, touching the equipment with his hands, looking at the shiny steel tanks and tubes with something that looks like love. This is the only place Walter White ever truly felt like himself. Not the classroom, not the house, not gray matter. Here, in the lab, surrounded by chemistry. The police sirens wail in the distance. Walter collapses on the floor. The camera pulls up and away, and we see Walter White lying on the ground, dead, surrounded by the equipment that gave him the only thing he ever really wanted: the feeling of being alive. The song that plays over the final scene is Baby Blue by Badfinger. And if you listen to the lyrics, they are not about regret or sorrow. They are a love letter, a goodbye to the thing that meant the most to him. And that thing was never his family. It was never the money. It was never even the power. It was the work, the chemistry, the craft. The one thing in Walter White's life that made him feel like he was exactly who he was always supposed to be. In the end, Walter White did not die as a father, or a husband, or a teacher, or a kingpin. He died as a chemist, lying on the floor of a lab, right where he belonged. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.